welcome back to Middle-earth. It's good to have you here again. If you've been listening for a while, you already know this is our quiet corner of Arda, a place where the fires burn low, the world slows down, and the stories feel familiar. Tonight, we'll wander through ancient forests, forgotten kingdoms, and the long shadows of the Second and Third Age. No rush, no noise, just the lore of the Lord of the Rings, told gently, like it was always meant to be heard. So, settle in. Let your mind drift to the Shire, to Rivendell, to the white towers of Minas Tirith. And together, let's return to Middle-earth. A shadow. Over the lonely mountain. Over the lonely mountain, the night is black and breathless. No moon, no movement, only a dull red pulse that rises and falls along the snow-crowned peak, as if the stone itself were drawing breath. Far below, across the dark waters, the lamps of Lake Town flicker like a fragile necklace of fire, strung along the edge of the world, and utterly unaware that it hangs beside a sleeping abyss. The wind is thin here. It carries the dry hiss of cinders, the faint memory of wings that once beat like thunder over dale, and the smell of something burned long ago and never quite forgotten. We journey into this silence, into the grey shadows pooled around the roots of Erebor, and we feel it, the oppressive weight of a catastrophe that is not past, but merely paused. A dragon sleeps above, and all the small, warm lights of men and elves and dwarves lie within the circle of his dream. Deep within the mountain, beyond doors choked with rubble and halls drowned in darkness, Smaug lies coiled upon his hoard. His breathing is slow. Each exhalation ripples across mountains of gold, sending coins sliding in soft, metallic whispers, like a golden tide forever on the verge of breaking. Jewels shift and sink beneath the weight of his talons. Ancient crowns crackle and melt slightly where his fire heat seeps into them, as if the centuries themselves were being smelted down. In that cavern, there is no true light, only the dull glow of his belly, and the occasional flare from a half-dreamed flame along his teeth. Yet his mind is not dim. Behind those closed, scarred lids, an ancient intelligence watches the world it cannot see, counting, measuring, remembering. Not a mere beast, not simply a marauder, but a will of pride and malice, older than the kingdoms he destroyed, delighting in the knowledge that the fate of Middle-earth bends around his indolent sleep. Now let's step together into the south, over leagues of night and forgotten roads, where the forest once called greenwood has turned to mirkwood. There the trees stand close and sickly, their branches heavy with webs and with a grey, unnatural mist that clings to the ground like a second, poisonous shadow. At its heart rises Dol Guldur, the hill of sorcery, black and broken-backed, yet whispering with a presence that never truly rests. Here another power keeps vigil. The necromancer they name him, a hidden master whose true nature most in this age have forgotten. No roaring furnace, no avalanche of coins, but a quiet, suffocating will, coiled not around treasure, but around fear itself. His servants move like smudges of night beneath the trees. His thought reaches out, testing, probing, weighing the strength of those same distant stars that shine above Smaug's mountain. Two predators share this third age. One wrapped in gold, one wrapped in shadow. They do not know each other's names, not yet, But already their long wanderings in darkness are shaping the story behind the story, bending unseen toward a single question. As a cold wind rises and carries the faint echo of a dragon's growl southward, somewhere in that deeper dark, a will like a burning eye turns toward the north and listens. In a world that can barely endure one of them, could Smaug and Sauron ever truly share the same sky? Two monsters, one age, framing the impossible duel. In that question, the mists part a little. Two shapes emerge from the grey of the late Third Age, not as vague legends, but as very real powers walking the same world at the same time. On one side, Smaug the Golden, last of the great fire drakes coiled in his cavern of stolen light beneath the lonely mountain. On the other, Sauron, the Dark Lord, a fallen Maya of terrible will, gathering shadows to himself in Dol Guldur as the necromancer. They are not separated by ages of myth. They are neighbours in time. Smaug is no young worm. His fire can melt the side of Erebor. His wings carry him across kingdoms in a single night. His presence alone can unmake courage. Sauron, in these same hidden years, is still ringless, still recovering his strength, a dark intelligence more than a towering war form, haunting the fortress in southern Mirkwood. And yet, even diminished, his will reaches across mountains, bending orcs, trolls, and lesser spirits to his purpose. So we journey into a very precise moment, when dragonfire and disembodied malice share the same age, and the fate of Middle-earth hangs quietly in the balance. Here is our central impossible duel. If Bard's black arrow had failed, if the thrush had been a heartbeat slower, and Smaug had wheeled away from Lake Town alive and enraged, what then? Could that ancient fire drake have flown south, swept over the dark trees of Mirkwood, and actually driven Sauron from Dol Guldur? In open sky above Mordor, could he have broken the Dark Lord's power, scattered his hosts, even destroyed him outright? Or would he have found, as so many others did, that Sauron is not merely an enemy you can burn? This is not idle monster versus monster spectacle. Gandalf himself fears the opposite alignment. Smaug in Sauron's service. Dragonfire married to the will that forged the One Ring. If their alliance would have been catastrophic, then exploring their enmity shows us just how fragile the balance of power truly was. How close did Middle-earth come to a world where the West faced not one shadow but two, locked in their own terrible rivalry? So, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's step together into a careful reckoning. In the next part of this deep dives into Middle-earth lore, we'll anchor ourselves in what Tolkien actually gives us. Smaug's size, age, and fire. Sauron's ringless state as the necromancer, the fear of fire in his servants, the resilience of dragons against domination. We uncover not only who hits harder, but whose pride cracks first, whose fear runs deeper, whose strategy might turn victory into ruin. Because beneath the scales and the armor, this is the story behind the story. What did Tolkien think evil really is? A mountain of gold with a dragon on top? Or a will in the dark that needs no body at all? And when we place them face to face, we may find that the deadliest dragon of the Third Age is still outmatched by something far more insidious. Names of fire and shadow. Who are Smaug and Sauron, really? So to weigh fire against shadow, we first have to ask, who exactly are we putting in the scales? A greedy dragon on a pile of coins, and a lidless eye on a tower? or two ancient powers whose wanderings begin long before Bilbo ever steps out his front door. Let's step together into the long memory of Middle-earth. Dragons are not an accident of this age. In the First Age, when the world was younger and the wars were closer to the music of creation, Morgoth unleashed Glaurung, the father of dragons, on the elves of Beleriand. Later came Ankalagon the Black, so vast that when he fell from the sky, his ruin broke the towers of Thangorodrim. Against that line of devastation, Smaug is not a lone monster in the north. He is the last great echo of that ancient breed, a fire drake of the Third Age, smaller than Ankalagon perhaps, but still mighty enough to melt the side of the lonely mountain in a single, wrathful pass. Smaug's power is immediate. You can hear it in the beating of wings, see it in the red-gold blaze across the night, feel it in the way men of the north speak of him. To the people of Dale and Esgaroth, he is a local apocalypse, the end of cities, the death of trade, the burning of families and fields. His fire is not metaphor. It is heat and ruin and the sudden end of your world. Sauron begins elsewhere and earlier, before the shaping of the seas and mountains. Before the sun first rose, he was Myron, a Maya of Aule, a primordial spirit of craft and order. Not a mere sorcerer, not a king with a talent for dark lore, but an immortal mind older than the very lands he seeks to rule. When he bends the knee to Morgoth, that talent is twisted into a will to dominate, to turn all design toward tyranny. And for long ages through wars and defeats and the drowning of Beleriand, he does not die as dragons die. He is unbodied, diminished, yet always returning from the grey margins of the world. Here we uncover a crucial difference. Smaug is incarnate terror. Scales, teeth, claws, the rush of air as he dives, the psychological weight of a voice that knows your name and your weakness. Sauron is will. Sometimes he wears fair forms, sometimes iron armor, sometimes nothing at all but a whisper in the dark. Yet he is always anchored to his craft. Above all, to the One Ring, where so much of his native power is poured that his spirit and that golden circle become one fate. Within the story, their reputations reflect this asymmetry. In The Hobbit, most common folk barely know of Sauron. They speak instead of the necromancer far away in a hidden fortress, a rumour in the south of Mirkwood. But Smaug? Children in Lake Town grow up on tales of his coming. Old men remember the red day when the mountain roared and Dale fell. To them, the dragon is the edge of the map made flesh. Among the wise, it is reversed. Gandalf, Elrond, Galadriel, even Saruman in his pride speak of Sauron as a shadow over all lands, a systemic sickness that seeps into kings, councils, and roads no dragon will ever see. Smaug can scour a valley. Sauron can corrupt a century. So when we journey into this question of who might defeat whom, we are already comparing a volcano to a disease of the whole earth. One explodes and is done. The other lingers, invisible, reshaping the fate of Middle-earth in silence. And the deeper we go into these deep dives into Middle-earth lore, the more we'll see that any battle between them would be fought on very different terms than fire versus fire. Because the next step is to ask, in the actual age of Bilbo Baggins, what forms do these two powers really wear, and what limits are already closing around them both? A game of timelines. Where the Hobbit meets the shadow. So let's step together into the actual years on the calendar, because this is where the story behind the story quietly tightens like a noose. Smaug and Sauron do not just haunt the same age in the abstract. Their timelines brush past each other with a precision that feels almost designed, and yet they never quite meet. First, the dragon. In the year 2770 of the Third Age, fire falls on Erebor. Smaug descends from the northern wastes, annihilates the kingdom under the mountain, and drives Thror's people into exile. One attack, one day of terror. And, for more than 170 years after, he lies coiled in the dark, brooding on gold, a living volcano sealed inside the lonely mountain. When Bard's black arrow finds the gap in his armor in 2941, Smaug's personal chronology closes. His age of burning spans barely a human lifetime and a half, but its shadow stretches over centuries. Now, the other power. Around the year 1050, long before Smaug ever wakes, a grey, nameless fear rises in Greenwood the Great. A fortress called Dol Guldur appears, and a figure known only as the Necromancer takes root there. This is Sauron in a veiled, experimental phase, testing how much of a body, how much of a presence he can reclaim without the One Ring. In 2063, Gandalf presses him hard enough that he withdraws, beginning the watchful peace. But in 2460, the shadow returns. Dol Guldur is reoccupied. The necromancer's identity becomes the central question of the hidden centuries before Bilbo ever leaves the Shire. By the time of The Hobbit, Sauron is back in Dol Guldur, still ringless, still rebuilding. He is not yet the iron tyrant of Barad-dûr, but he is no lesser wraith either. He is a Maya, a fallen immortal, gathering orcs and spiders and worse in the depth of southern Mirkwood, experimenting with form, with terror, with will. This is the Sauron whose path almost crosses Smaug's, and in the middle stand the wise. The White Council meets. Elrond of Rivendell, Galadriel of Lorien, Saruman the White presiding, and Gandalf the Grey Wanderer whose roads have already taken him into Dol Guldur itself. They debate the Necromancer. Is he truly Sauron returned, or some lesser shadow? When should they strike? Gandalf alone adds another fear, the dragon in the north. He has seen Smaug's devastation. He imagines with the clarity of a strategist what it would mean if Sauron's will and Smaug's fire ever marched under one banner. All right, dim the lights, get comfortable, because here the timelines interlock. In 2941, as Thorin's company creeps toward Erebor and Bilbo wakes the dragon, the White Council finally moves. Saruman, at last, agrees to assail Dol Guldur. While Smaug is raging toward Lake Town, Sauron is being driven out of his Mirkwood stronghold. Two storms break at once, north and south, and then the Razor Edge. Smaug dies in 2941. In 2951, Sauron openly declares himself in Mordor and begins rebuilding Barad-dûr. There is a brief 10-year window when a living Smaug could have emerged into a world where Dol Guldur was empty, Mordor not yet fully rearmed, and the Dark Lord himself in motion between strongholds. Can you feel how close that comes to collision? We journey into that gap next, into the question that haunts the fate of Middle-earth. If Smaug had survived Lake Town and flown south into that unsettled decade, what truly happens when Dragonfire meets a disembodied Dark Lord on the road between shadows? Before we fly, how this journey will unfold. So before we send Dragonfire roaring against the Dark Lord, we need a map. Not of Middle-earth's roads and mountains, but of the argument we're about to walk together. Because this isn't just a wild monster mash. This is a careful test of power, form, and fate across the grey centuries of the Third Age. Our thesis is simple to say and much harder to answer. We are going to test whether Smaug could have defeated Sauron. To do that, we'll weigh their natures, their powers, and the ground beneath their feet across several carefully built scenarios. Could Smaug shatter Dol Guldur? Could he burn the necromancer out under an open sky? Could even a great dragon endure the shadow of Mordor itself? First, we journey into Smaug's true strength. Not just big dragon, lots of fire, but age, cunning, flight, and that paralyzing terror Tolkien hints at when he calls him one of the last great dragons of the world. We'll look at how hot his fire truly is, what it means that he could melt the side of the lonely mountain, and how dragons once broke the hosts of the First Age. Only then will we really understand what flies out of Erebor, if he survives Bard's arrow. Then we turn to Sauron. Not the flaming eye on the movie posters, but the changing, wounded spirit behind the story behind the story. We uncover his state as the necromancer of Dol Guldur, bodiless in the fullest sense without the One Ring, testing his strength in a hidden fortress. We'll trace how his form and limitations shift from Dol Guldur to Barad-dûr, and what he can and cannot do without that ring on his hand. After that, we'll step through 3 confrontation models. First, Smaug assaulting Dol Guldur, where Sauron is strong in sorcery but not yet enthroned in Mordor. Second, a meeting in the open air, dragon against disembodied will, far from any fortress. And third, the darkest possibility, Smaug flying against Mordor itself, with Sauron either ringless or reunited with the One. In each, we'll account for Nazgûl, orc hosts, siege engines, and the way even mighty servants fear fire. Along the way, we'll be clear about method. We'll mark what Tolkien explicitly wrote, what can be reasonably drawn from the wider legendarium, and where we are stepping into imaginative but lore-respectful speculation. When we cross that line, we'll say so. And all of this matters because it brushes directly against the War of the Ring. If Smaug had not fallen, if he had turned south and become Sauron's rival instead of his potential ally, the fate of Middle-earth might have changed beyond recognition. Would there even be a fellowship? Would hobbits ever leave the Shire? All right, dim the lights, get comfortable. This will be a long, cozy deep dive. One of those deep dives into Middle-earth lore where we let the tale unfold slowly. By the end, you will see Smaug, Sauron, and Gandalf's old fears in a new, unsettling light. Let's step together into the first layer, the dragon's true power. A quick word by the fire. Join the company. Before we press deeper into the dragon's lair and the shadow of Dol Guldur, let's pause for just a heartbeat by the fire. Because as we journey into these hidden what-ifs and forgotten crossroads of the Third Age, there's a little story behind the story we should talk about. Right now, most of you listening to this aren't actually subscribed. The numbers are pretty clear. Around 77% of you watching this very moment are traveling these roads with us as wanderers, not yet part of the company. You return for the long tales, for the ancient names and grey maps and quiet speculations, but YouTube still thinks you're just passing through. The truth is, these deep dives into Middle-earth lore do not appear out of the void. They take weeks of research through appendices and letters, Careful scripting to keep the tale clear and cinematic, and sound designed to make it feel like you really are in a dark hall beneath a mountain, or at the edge of Mirkwood listening to distant wolves. When you subscribe and leave a like, you are not just feeding an algorithm. You are helping keep this storyteller by the fire format alive in a noisy world. So if you find yourself coming back to these long wanderings through the hidden centuries of Middle-earth, consider taking one simple step. Hit subscribe. Turn on notifications so that when we uncover another forgotten age, another strange road, you're there from the first word. That tiny action on your side of the screen is what lets us keep asking questions like, could Smaug have burned Sauron out of the world, and then actually follow them all the way to the end? And I'm curious, where and when are you listening to this? Are you tucked up late at night with headphones on, the room dark, while the glow of the screen is your only fire? Are you on a morning commute, the grey world sliding past your window while we talk of dragons and necromancers? Maybe you're painting miniatures, carefully inking the armour of a ringwraith or the scales of a dragon while this plays in the background. Wherever you are part of a scattered fellowship, a company spread across continents and time zones, gathered around one tale. That, more than anything, is what the fate of Middle-earth feels like here. Many listeners, one story. All right, breathe, stir the embers, dim the lights, get comfortable again. We are only a breath away from returning to the lonely mountain and the dark tower of Dol Guldur. The deepest part of the question is still ahead. When fire and shadow finally meet, who truly rules the Third Age? Settle in, returning to the mists of the Third Age. So stay right where you are, but let the world around you change. If you can, dim the lights, get comfortable under a blanket or pull on a favourite sweater. Maybe pour something warm or let a fan or rain sound whisper in the background, so that as we journey into the mists of the Third Age, the noise of our own age falls gently away. Because we are going back now, back to the long grey river of the Anduin, where dawn rises pale and cold over slow, patient waters. Mist clings to the reeds and the half-sunken ruins along its banks, remnants of forgotten wars and broken kingdoms, while to the east a darker line scars the horizon. Mirkwood, once Greenwood the Great, now a looming wall of branches and shadow where sunlight goes in and does not always come out again. Far to the north, beyond the well-trodden roads of men and hobbits, the world rises into teeth of stone. The grey mountains stand in ragged ranks, their peaks white and indifferent, watching centuries pass beneath them. Dragons once crawled and coiled among those crags, and even now, the wind there can feel like a memory of wings, a cold breath from an age when fire fell from the sky. And under another mountain, alone on the plain, there is a different fire. Erebor, the lonely mountain, lifts its crown above the desolation, but the true glow is hidden. Deep within, beneath tons of rock and silence, forges burn and treasure gleams with a dull inner light, all gathered beneath the coils of a single, slumbering will. That is the lair of Smaug the Golden, terror of the north, whose very name can make a hall grow quiet. Opposite him in the great tale stands another presence, far less visible, far more diffuse. In the south of that same forest, in a hill of many tunnels and black stone, the shadow has taken a body again. There the necromancer broods, Sauron the Shadow, the nameless one in Dol Guldur, watching the roads, calling dead things to his service, testing the strength of the world that once overthrew him. These are not bosses on a screen, waiting politely for their turn. They are ancient powers, the story behind the story of the Hobbit, moving long before a certain burglar ever crept down a tunnel with a ring in his pocket. And for centuries their spheres of fear almost touch the northern wastes of Dragonfire, the southern dungeons of necromantic will. So let's step together into a different mode of listening. Imagine a quiet chamber in Rivendell, a lore master setting down his cup of wine. The brief digression ended. His voice lowers, the candles gutter. He is no longer explaining, he is telling. To weigh Smaug against Sauron, we must begin where he would begin, with dragons themselves. What is a dragon in Tolkien's world? Not merely a beast, but a weapon forged in the Elder Days, a shard of Morgoth's own malice given wings and flame. Until we uncover that, we cannot yet say whose shadow truly rules the Third Age. Forged in Morgoth's wars, the lineage of dragons. So we journey into an age before hobbits and pipeweed, before the grey wanderings of Gandalf, back into the white-hot forge where dragons themselves were first imagined. Not by elves, not by dwarves, by Morgoth. In the Elder Days, when the world was young and the stars still burned cold over Beleriand, Morgoth looked upon the siege lines of the elves and the high pride of their hidden fortresses and desired a new terror. Orcs broke, trolls blundered. Even Balrogs could not be everywhere at once. And so, in the deep pits of Angband, he twisted fire and spirit together, binding malice into flesh, until there came forth the first of the great drakes, not beasts of nature, but engines of war, bred to break walls, scatter hosts, and turn courage to ash. Dragons are not accidents of the wild, they are weapons, designed. Foremost among these in the First Age was Glaurung, the father of dragons. He crawls out of the Silmarillion like a living catastrophe, wingless at first, a vast scaled serpent of fire and venom. But his most terrible power is not his flame, it is his mind. With a gaze like a weight of iron, he freezes armies, shatters resolve, and bends wills. He unmans Turin, ensnares Nienor, and with words alone destroys a house of heroes more thoroughly than any siege. Through him we uncover the truth that in Tolkien's world, a dragon is not simply a battering ram with wings. It is a presence that invades the thoughts, distorts memory, and feeds upon despair. Later still comes Ankalagan the Black, greatest of the winged dragons unleashed in the War of Wrath, when the Valar at last assail Morgoth in his final fortress. Imagine the sky over Thangorodrim darkened not by storm, but by an entire host of fire drakes, with Ankalagon as their mountain-sized vanguard. His fall alone, cast down by Eärendil in his shining ship, breaks the triple towers of Thangorodrim and reshapes the very face of the world. This is the apocalyptic scale dragons once reached, when the fate of Middle-earth turned on the beating of their wings. And then, the long defeat. Beleriand sinks. Morgoth is cast into the void. Through the hidden centuries of the Second Age and into the Third, dragons dwindle. By the time we meet Smaug under the Lonely Mountain, he is not the greatest of his kind, but one of the last great fire drakes, a lingering echo of Morgoth's primeval hatred in a world that has almost forgotten such terrors. His fire can melt the stone of Erebor. His shadow can empty a valley of men. His voice alone can unmake a dwarf's resolve. yet he walks the roads of a fading age, when wonders are fewer and enemies more subtle. So where does that leave us? If Glaurung and Ankerlagun, mightiest of their race, were still only servants of Morgoth, what hope would a lesser, though still great, dragon like Smaug have against a Maya who once served that same dark master? When dragonfire meets a will like Sauron's, which breaks first, the flesh or the spirit behind it? Hold that question, because in the next step of our deep dives into Middle-earth lore, we will set Smaug's inherited terror against the necromancer's hidden strength, and the answer is not as simple as dragon versus dark lord. Smaug unveiled, size, fire, and fear. So to weigh that clash of wills, we first have to know what, exactly, Smaug brings to the battlefield. Not the legend, not the campfire tale, but the creature himself, his wings, his fire, his ancient coiled malice. Smaug is not Ankerlagun the Black, breaking mountains in the First Age, but he is no mere drake either. Tolkien tells us he can lie across the great gate of the lonely mountain and still curl his tail within, a living curtain of bronze and red. Artists who follow those words draw a dragon hundreds of feet from snout to tail, long enough that a company of dwarves is a scattering of toys at his feet. He has slept on that hoard for nearly 2 centuries, maybe more, through the slow wanderings of men and the fading of elven power, growing vast and heavy as the gold works into his scales. When he wakes, the world burns. Smaug is a true fire drake of the north, and Tolkien does not exaggerate his breath. His flame does not merely scorch, it melts. Stone on the side of Erebor runs like wax when he lashes out in rage. Lake Town does not just catch fire, it becomes a furnace, the very air turned into a killing heat that drives people into the water. This is siege fire, city-killing fire, the kind of elemental force that could sweep siege engines from the field and turn orc hosts into shadows on the ground. And he brings that fire on the wing. From Erebor to Lake Town is leagues of wild country, yet Smaug crosses it in a single, furious flight, scouting, circling and striking before the night is old. We journey into those dark skies with him and see how he moves, diving between mountain and valley, skimming the lake, climbing again in a rush of beating wings. Against ground-bound foes, that is a terrible advantage. How do you answer an enemy who can choose his angle, his height, his moment, and then be gone before a spear is loosed? But Smaug's greatest weapon may be the one we cannot see. Dragons in Tolkien's world kill with the mind as much as with the claw. Smaug toys with Bilbo under the mountain, drawing him out with flattery, riddles, and half-truths, probing for weakness. He taunts Thorin's company without ever seeing them, striking at pride, at greed, at old wounds. His very name moves like a shadow through the north. Men of Dale, of Esgaroth, of the wider world remember what happened when he came, and their courage withers. Is that not its own battlefield power, to make your enemy lose heart before the first blow is struck? And yet, there is the flaw. The bare patch in his jewel-crusted armour left exposed because he delights in his own invulnerability. Pride has literally eaten through his defence. The story behind the story is that even the greatest monsters of that age carry their own doom within them. Not just in a missing scale, but in a character that cannot imagine defeat. Hold that thought, because when we set Smaug's very real strengths against Sauron's more hidden ones, that arrogance may matter more, than all the fire in the world. The mind of the dragon: pride, greed, and willpower. So let's step together into something even more dangerous than dragonfire or dark sorcery: the interior of Smaug's mind. Because if the story behind the story is a duel between powers, then pride, greed, and will are the real weapons on the field, long before claws ever meet armor. Smaug's pride is almost a living thing. He delights in his own cleverness, circling Bilbo with riddling questions, savouring each deduction, certain that he has seen through every grey shadow and hidden motive. He assumes as an axiom of the world that no one can truly threaten him. When he senses that the thief has come from Lake Town and guesses at Thorin's claim, he is not merely angry, he is outraged at the idea of being used, of being cheated. That fury makes him terrifying, but it also makes him predictable. A creature who must prove his invincibility will fly exactly where his enemies most expect. Then there is his greed, which is not just love of gold, but identity. Smaug is his hoard. The ancient coins and jewelled mail are, in his own mind, the visible proof that the age belongs to him. He will not leave it unguarded for long. Even his assault on Lake Town is in part a punitive raid to secure his reputation, and by extension, his treasure. Could such a dragon ever be persuaded to wage a long campaign far from that golden bed? Or would every league of empty sky feel like a risk that some hidden hand was stealing his true self in his absence? All right, dim the lights, get comfortable, because here we uncover something often forgotten. Smaug is not a mindless beast. He deduces Thorin's lineage from a few stray words. He knows the politics of Dale and Erebor, the line of Girion, the value of the Arkenstone. He understands flattery well enough to mock it and fear well enough to cultivate it. On a local scale, he is a strategist, able to read roads, rivers, and rival claims. He is not Sauron, weaving designs across centuries, but he is far from simple. And like Sauron, he exerts a will. Dragons in Tolkien's world cast a kind of enchantment, a paralyzing glamour that can freeze men where they stand. That suggests a spiritual weight, a native power of domination. A mind that can bind others is rarely easy to bind in turn. Would Smaug's inner fire resist the necromancer's distant commands better than the Nazgul's grey, emptied souls or the broken wills of orcs? Here lies the dilemma at the heart of the fate of Middle-earth. Is Smaug's pride so absolute that he would rather burn and fall than ever bend the neck to Sauron? Or would that same pride, stroked with ancient flattery and subtle lies, lead him step by step into the Dark Lord's service while still believing himself the master? Hold that question, because when we journey into Sauron's own methods of corruption and control, we'll see just how he treats allies who think they cannot be ruled. From Anatar to the Necromancer, Sauron's many faces. So to answer that question, we have to ask another, deeper one. When we say Sauron, which Sauron do we mean? Because the Dark Lord that Smaug might have faced in the grey years of the Third Age is not the same being who once walked fair among the elves, or who commanded dragons under a darker master in an earlier world. In the First Age, long before the Lonely Mountain ever gleamed with gold, Sauron is not yet the great enemy. He is the lieutenant, the right hand of Morgoth, the original Dark Lord, dwelling in the iron deeps of Angband. He rules Tol in Gaurhoth, the Isle of Werewolves, mastering beasts of fang and shadow, twisting spirits into slavering horrors. Dragons like Glaurung and later The winged terrors of the War of Wrath are not his creations, but they are his colleagues in a sense, monstrous weapons in the same ancient arsenal. For centuries he watches how Morgoth breeds fear, how he unleashes fire and wing and venom upon armies. Sauron learns. He studies how to break the wills of the mighty, not only the weak. Then we journey into the Second Age, and the mask changes. Gone is the monstrous war captain. In his place comes Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. Fair of form, wise in craft, he walks among the elven smiths of a region with gentle counsel and bright designs. Not a tyrant, not a roaring dragon, but a teacher, a friend, a patron. Yet in secret he forges the One Ring, a golden circle meant not to crush bodies, but to bind minds. It is the story behind the story of every later war. Sauron's true genius is domination, the slow, invisible chain laid upon the heart. At the end of that age, when Elendil and Gil-galad cast him down, his body is destroyed. The fair form is burned away. And Tolkien tells us that from that moment, he can never again appear save in a terrible shape. The beautiful Anatar is gone. What remains is a spirit of malice, forced to wear horror as its only face. By the Third Age, his manifestations grow more ambiguous. In Dol Guldur, he is the shadowy necromancer. In Barad-dûr, he is the great eye, lidless, wreathed in flame. In some visions and adaptations, an armoured warlord, black and towering. Tolkien leaves this deliberately hazy. Is he truly an eye, or is that how his presence is perceived by those he hunts? Is the armour a real body, or a symbol of a will that no longer fits any flesh? During The Hobbit, this ambiguity is crucial. The necromancer in Dol Guldur is Sauron in recovery, gathering strength, but not yet enthroned in full corporeal majesty. He lacks the ring, yet his will is already strong enough to command Nazgûl, to poison Greenwood into Mirkwood, to crush Thrain's mind and seize a dwarf ring. Smaug, if he flew south in those days, would not be swooping upon a simple sorcerer in a tower, but upon a concentrated, ancient malice that has worn many faces and learned, across ages and ages, exactly how to break the proud. Dim the lights, get comfortable, because next we uncover what that actually means in a fight. Dragon's fire against disembodied will, wings against the hidden centuries of Sauron's power, and how the fate of Middle-earth might have changed if those two terrors had ever truly met. A Dark Lord without his ring. So what does it mean in practice for Smaug to face a Dark Lord who is missing the very heart of his strength? To answer that, we journey into the strange metaphysics of the One Ring itself and the grey, half-bodied power that calls itself the Necromancer. Sauron does not merely make a weapon when he forges the ring. He pours into it a vast portion of his native Maya power, his will to dominate, his capacity to bend the fate of Middle-earth. With it on his hand, he is more than himself, a terrible amplification. Without it, he is maimed. Not slain, not emptied, but diminished, bound to the ring's survival, unable ever again to grow beyond what he once was. For long centuries after Isildur's fall, that loss defines him. In the Third Age, as we uncover in these deep dives into Middle-earth lore, Sauron cannot simply stride forth and crush all resistance. Without the ring, he cannot cast a single, irresistible shadow over every free people at once. He cannot compel the wills of the great, not as he did in Númenor. Yet even ringless, he is far beyond mortal kings. His thought can reach far. His hatred can twist the weak. His command over orcs, trolls, and the Nazgul is absolute. By the time of The Hobbit, his hidden centuries have led him to Dol Guldur. There, as the necromancer, he gathers ghosts and wraiths, breeds new broods of orcs in the dark, and sends fear crawling along the roads of Greenwood until it becomes Mirkwood. He is not a visible tyrant on a black throne. He is a disembodied will anchored to a stronghold, a presence you feel more than see. He can't yet dominate the whole world, but he can make a vast region sicken and obey. Notice his caution. He hides his name, masking himself from the wise, testing the West with probes and rumors. He lets the Nazgul sleep in their graves of secrecy. Only when his power is secure in Mordor will he throw off the grey veil and declare himself. Why move slowly if you are invincible? And yet, he is not invulnerable. When the White Council finally acts and assails Dol Guldur, they do not destroy Sauron, but they do something important. They drive him out. Concerted, focused power, Galadriel, Elrond, Gandalf, Saruman, can dislodge him from a fortress and force a retreat. That is our precedent. That is the story behind the story. So here is the dangerous question. If the wise can scour Dol Guldur, what might an overwhelming, utterly different force achieve? Could dragonfire and aerial terror break the necromancer's hold on a place, even burn his servants to ash faster than his will can gather them? Or would Smaug find that a bodiless Dark Lord, even ringless, is an enemy you cannot simply roast and be done with? Hold that thought. Dim the lights, get comfortable, because next we step together into Dol Guldur itself and imagine Smaug's shadow falling across its towers. Fire against shadow, comparing their raw power. We stand now before Dol Guldur in our minds, its towers drowned in grey mist, and we let Smaug's shadow fall across its broken crown. Fire against shadow, scale against spirit, a single ancient dragon against a Dark Lord who has forgotten what it is to die. To weigh them, we journey into their raw power before we throw them at each other in any one scene. Smaug's arsenal is brutally simple and terribly direct. His dragonfire is no campfire blaze. It is a white-hot torrent that melts stone, sloughs armor from bone, and once carved glowing channels in the side of the lonely mountain. His claws can rip siege towers like rotted wood. His tail can shatter gates and walls, and from the air he is a living storm of teeth, flame, and falling ruin. When he passes over a city, the real weapon is not only fire, but panic. Armies break, captains forget their orders, and the will to resist simply collapses. Sauron, ringless, is the opposite kind of threat. As the necromancer, his offensive power is bound up with shadow sorcery, with the slow poisoning of hearts and the projection of fear over leagues of forest and plain. He can send black thoughts into the dreams of kings, twist the courage of captains into despair, and call dead things from forgotten barrows to do his will. If he chooses to take shape, that body would not be weak. Remember that even in the Second Age he strode as a warlord, terrible in close combat, and beyond his own hands, his weapons extend through the Nazgul, through captains of orcs and trolls and darker spirits, each one a distant finger of his mind. When he strikes everywhere at once. Their defences reveal two very different philosophies of survival. Smaug is a fortress made flesh. His scales, save for that one fateful gap, are a near impenetrable mail that turned arrow, spear, and sword for centuries. His wings give him the ultimate shield. distance. If the ground grows dangerous, he simply is not there. Yet if his body fails, he is finished. There is no Smaug the spirit haunting the hidden centuries. Sauron, by contrast, is hard to end, but easier to wound. His semi-incorporeal state in this age makes him resistant to simple annihilation. Destroy his form, and his spirit recoils maimed but unextinguished. His great weakness is not armor but destiny. He is anchored to the fate of the ring. Without it, he is diminished. With it, he is nearly unstoppable. That is not a crack in a breastplate. It is a crack in the world. So whose strength truly rules the Third Age? Smaug can annihilate a region, Erebor, Dale, Lake Town, within a single night, leaving only char and silence. Sauron can corrupt nations over generations, turning proud realms into grey husks that serve his will. One is local and immediate, a hammer blow. The other is global and enduring, a tide. We uncover here that a clash between them would not be a simple contest of hit points, as if we could tally burns against curses. It would be spectacle against subtlety, a roaring furnace against a distributed systemic evil. And that raises the real question. If Smaug ever hurled himself against Sauron's stronghold, would he be fighting a single enemy? Or an entire invisible network of power spread across the fate of Middle-earth itself? Hold that tension, because next we follow those roads into specific battlefields and ask in concrete terms, who walks away from the ruins, and who lingers on as a shadow? Why Gandalf feared their alliance. So now we stand in that tension. Smaug on one side, Sauron on the other, and the roads of the north running like thin lines between them. To understand what hangs in the balance, we have to listen to the one mind in Middle-earth that saw both threats clearly and early. Gandalf does not guess, he calculates. In The Hobbit's Quest of Erebor material, he tells us plainly that a dragon in the north is not just a local menace, but a strategic catastrophe waiting to be claimed. He fears that if Sauron returns in strength, he might use Smaug with devastating effect. Not frightful, not troublesome, devastating. And in the appendices that fear sharpens. Gandalf imagines the north broken, Rivendell threatened, the free peoples crushed between Mordor and a dragon-haunted wilderness. When he says that Sauron and Smaug together would be a disaster for all the north and gravely endanger the whole of the west, he is weighing the fate of Middle-earth on very cold scales. Remember who is speaking. This is not a man easily impressed by raw power. Gandalf has walked the hidden centuries, seen the fall of ancient kingdoms, stood in Dol Guldur beneath the will of the necromancer, and lived. He has watched Balrogs in old tales and heard the laments of those who saw Ankalagan, the black fall from the sky. For him to pause, to look at one dragon in one grey mountain and say, "This must be removed before Sauron can reach him," that tells us Smaug is no trivial piece. All right, dim the lights, get comfortable, because here we journey into Gandalf's strategy. Why would Sauron want Smaug? Imagine a flying engine of fire sweeping over Dale and Erebor, then west along the ancient roads, burning the vales of Anduin, breaking the Beornings, harrying the woodmen, driving refugees south in chaos. From the Iron Hills to the Blue Mountains, no stronghold is safe. A single pass of that dragon over Rivendell could force Elrond into hiding or ruin his house entirely. And while the north burns, Dol Guldur and later Mordor could tighten their grip on the misty mountains, sealing off any hope of resistance crossing from west to east. In that light, we uncover something subtle. If Smaug can so decisively tilt the board, he is not merely a pawn. He is a powerful, unpredictable piece that Sauron would prefer to bend rather than break. Better to enthrall the dragon, or at least direct his hunger, than to risk destroying a weapon that could terrorize half the world. And here is the quiet inversion. Gandalf fears them together, but what would he have thought of them at war? If the Dark Lord and the last great firedrake had ever truly clashed, could the West have survived the shock waves, or secretly prayed for them? In our next deep dives into Middle-earth lore, we'll follow that question into the smoke and ask, if Smaug had flown against the shadow, who walks away from the ruins? Could Sauron break a dragon's will? So let's follow that plume of smoke a little closer and ask a quieter, stranger question. Even before claws and fire, could the Dark Lord have simply reached into Smaug's mind and turned the dragon's rage to his own design? In a world where will is a weapon, sometimes the deadliest battles leave no scars on stone at all. When we journey into Sauron's record, the pattern is chilling. With the 9 rings, he does not merely bribe mortal kings. He hollows them out until only the ring-wraiths remain, will-less extensions of his thought, riding the dark roads of the Third Age. He bends orcs and trolls by fear and habit, driving them in waves against the West. Even the proud men of the East and South march beneath his banner, their ancient cultures slowly wrapped in promises, lies, and threats. In Númenor he walks unarmed into the court of Ar-Pharazôn and, through flattery and poisoned counsel, topples an island kingdom without drawing a blade. This is the story behind the story of every Black Tower and Burning Plain. Sauron conquers from within first. But there are limits. He cannot simply speak a word and break the elves of the West. Galadriel and Elrond stand against him for long centuries. The Valar are far beyond his reach. Even among the Maiar, those of equal or greater rank, like Gandalf when finally revealed in his fullness, are not his puppets. His power to dominate is vast, yet it runs up against certain walls. Ancient wisdom, humility, and wills rooted in a strength older than his own shadow. Where, then, do dragons sit on this invisible ladder of spirits? Tolkien never calls them Maiar, yet they are not mere beasts. Born from Morgoth's darkest experiments in the First Age, the great fire drakes are infused with a twisted, conscious malice. They speak, they scheme, they hoard not only gold, but fear. In Smaug we see that legacy distilled, proud, suspicious, delighted by his own cleverness, and deeply, almost religiously devoted to his treasure. Such a mind does not kneel easily. So how would Sauron try? He would not begin with chains. He would begin with whispers. Promises of greater hoards than Erebor. Flattery that paints Smaug as the destined lord of the skies over a conquered world. Threats of annihilation if he refuses. Perhaps even subtle sorcery, fanning the embers of Smaug's greed until they blaze so hot that the dragon's choices become predictable and therefore usable. Not a ring-wraith, but a business partner who never realizes the contract is written in his own blood. All right, dim the lights, get comfortable and imagine that negotiation. The necromancer in his grey fortress. The last great worm coiled in red-gold fire. Could Sauron truly break such a will, or only bargain with it until betrayal came due? As we uncover their likely meeting points in the hidden centuries, the next question looms larger. If Smaug could not be enslaved, could he still be steered, just far enough to doom the fate of Middle-earth? Pattern break. What if Smaug refused to kneel? So let's interrupt the chessboard for a moment. No timelines, no councils, no careful calculations. Instead, dim the lights, get comfortable and imagine a single night after the fall of Lake Town, when the world still believes Smaug unassailable and Sauron only a whisper in the south. The sky above the lonely mountain is black and cold. Not the soft grey of autumn mist, but a hard, starless vault, as if the age itself were holding its breath. High over Dale's drowned ruins, a darker shape passes, cloaked in a shadow that drinks the faint light. It does not beat its wings. It glides. A Nazgul, wrapped in invisibility and malice, has been sent from Dol Guldur along the hidden roads of the night. It circles once, twice, tasting the air. Below, in the great wound that Smaug has torn in the mountainside, a dull red glow pulses like the heart of a furnace. Gold shifts. Scales rasp. The dragon is awake. A voice, thin as a knife edge, reaches inward, not quite sound, not quite thought. It offers titles: Lord of the Earth, Ally of the Nine, Favoured of the Eye. It speaks of the Dark Lord's return, of a world remade in shadow, of a place for Smaug beneath a greater will. Serve and be secure. Bend and be unleashed. Smaug laughs. Not a chuckle, not a hiss, but a roar of mirth that shakes the ancient stone. The treasure hall becomes a storm of sound and firelight. He uncoils, vast and terrible, and the very air seems to recoil from him as he surges towards the gate. Who, he demands, claims power over the king under the mountain's slayer? What master dares lay hand upon this horde? His contempt is a weapon sharper than his claws. Flame blooms along his jaws, not in attack yet, but in outrage. The stones sweat. Half-melted gold slumps and runs like a river. For a creature born of primordial fire, the presumption of a rival master is an insult beyond bearing. Above, the Nazgul's mount shrieks and wheels away. Fire, the one thing they never forgot to fear. The Wraith's will presses harder, cold and commanding, but to Smaug it is only an invisible itch at the edge of his mind. He snaps at the empty air, mocking this unseen challenger. Show yourself, stand before me. Let us see whose fear rules this world. We journey into a standoff that can only end in violence. The Nazgul cannot draw near the furnace heat of the gate. The dragon will not leave his throne of gold. Any attempt to bind him, to chain that ancient pride to the fate of Middle-earth, will be paid for in blackened wings and shattered stone. And here, in this imagined clash, we uncover the story behind the story. Smaug is not merely a weapon waiting for a hand. He is a will, treacherous and towering. Even Sauron, master of rings and spirits, might judge such a creature more risk than reward, better destroyed or avoided than trusted at his back. This is speculation, yes, but it rests on Tolkien's own pattern. Dragons in the hidden centuries are fiercely independent, servants of their own hunger rather than any banner. Let's step together into the next question. If Smaug would not kneel, then, in a true war of powers, could either one actually destroy the other? Scenario 1. Smaug strikes Dol Guldur. If they would not kneel to one another, then the only road left is collision. Not in polite councils or distant designs, but in fire and shadow over a single hill in the dark heart of the world. The place is Dol Guldur. Once Aman-Lanc, a fair height in Greenwood the Great, now a wound in the forest. In the grey years of the Third Age, its trees grow sickly, their branches clutching at the sky, their roots drinking poison. A fortress of shadow rises on the hilltop, not yet a Barad-dur of iron and teeth, but a stronghold of fear, ringed with palisades, towers, and deep pits where orcs breed and whisper. Around it, the very air tastes stale, as if it has forgotten the clean winds of the west. Now imagine the moment after Lake Town. In another telling of the story behind the story, Bard's arrow flies wide. Smaug lives. Enraged, wounded, his pride torn open even more than his armour, he wheels high above the lonely mountain and looks south. What calls him? Perhaps rumour of a growing power in Mirkwood, a hoard of captives and plunder, a dark well of strength fit for a dragon who refuses to fade. Or perhaps it is older than rumour, a migratory instinct baked into dragonkind since the First Age, drawing them, like iron filings to a lodestone, towards centres of darkness. So we journey into that vision. Night over southern Mirkwood. The corrupted forest itself is Sauron's first defence, a maze of twisted trunks and choking webs, haunted by great spiders and watchful eyes. Wraith-like spirits, the residue of centuries of torment, drift among the roots. Patrols of orcs and wolves circle the hill, and in some readings of the timeline, one or more Nazgul may already be there, cloaked in terror, serving the necromancer in secret. Against armies on the ground, this is a death zone. But against a dragon in the clouds, fire falls from above where no palisade can reach. Smaug's breath has melted the side of Erebor. Timber and stone ramparts would blacken and run like wax. Roofs blaze, towers crack. Orcs scatter under a rain of burning scale and shattered masonry. Even Nazgul, whose fear runs before them like a cold wind, recoil from ancient fire. The fortress is strong, yet its skin can burn. At its heart, though, there is something that cannot be so easily consumed. Sauron here is the necromancer, more shadow than flesh, a will without the one ring, yet terribly focused. His malice saturates the hill. He can lash out with terror that strikes the mind rather than the body, with sorcery that chokes the spirit and blinds the eye. And if his dwelling is truly breached, he can withdraw his essence, fleeing as a dark wind, abandoning stone while preserving himself for another age. So we uncover the central riddle. Could Smaug's claws and flame actually crack Dol Guldur open and drive Sauron out, winning a Pyrrhic victory for the free peoples without ever meaning to? Or would he find himself gnawing at a shadow that will not die, his gold-hungry fury spent on empty halls, while the true enemy slips away? All right, dim the lights, get comfortable. Our deep dives into Middle-earth lore now have to follow that battle to its brutal conclusion. Dol Guldur in flames. Tactical breakdown. So let's step together into the fire-lit skies above southern Mirkwood. In the grey pre-dawn, before the watchfires are stoked and the drums begin their endless beating, a shadow passes high above the world. Not a storm cloud. Not a great bird. Smaug, last of the great fire drakes, wheels in the upper airs where no arrow can reach, testing the winds over Dol Guldur. He would not come low at first. Dragons are ancient hunters, and this one has learned patience over long centuries coiled on gold. He circles at a height beyond clear sight, gauging the shape of the stronghold, tracing its towers and curtain walls with a predator's eye, searching for the soft places every fortress hides. Then, without warning, he folds his wings. The dive is sudden, almost silent at first, a line of falling darkness that becomes a roar. And in that last instant before impact, the red-gold furnace in his chest opens, and dragonfire pours down like a falling sun. Outer walls designed to resist rams and scaling ladders were never meant to be struck from directly above. Roofs burst into flame, parapets melt and slump. Orcs on the battlements die before they can scream, armor running like black water. This is the story behind the story of siegecraft in Middle-earth. Against a flying furnace, stone is not enough. Smaug would rake the towers with fire, banking along the curtain walls, using his speed and altitude to stay always just beyond the most desperate arrows. But Dol Guldur would not be helpless. Orc archers, drilled in fear and obedience, would loose volleys of black-feathered shafts into the sky. Crude ballistae and siege engines, perhaps adapted from old Númenórean designs, would hurl barbed bolts and chains upward. If any Nazgul were present, they might take wing on fell beasts, rising like tattered shadows to harry his flanks. Yet we uncover a crucial weakness here. Sauron's servants from Orc to Ringwraith bear an ancient fear of fire. How steady is your aim when the air itself is burning? How close will even a Nazgul dare fly to a dragon whose very breath can melt the side of a mountain? So Sauron must answer with powers no catapult can match. From the dungeons and black halls of Dol Guldur, the necromancer's will would surge outward, a wave of terror pressing against Smaug's mind. Darkness could thicken around the fortress, a great grey pall to blind his eyes. Illusions of false walls, phantom chasms, or swarming enemies might twist his senses mid-flight. Could even a dragon's pride be shaken if every instinct suddenly whispers that up is down and safety is death? Yet dragons, too, are Maya-touched in their beginnings, fire spirits twisted by Morgoth in the First Age. Smaug is no simple beast to be cowed like an orc. He might reel, he might misjudge a turn and smash a tower rather than skim it, but with each pass his fury would grow. Terror cuts both ways. The more Sauron presses, the more blindly destructive Smaug becomes, turning Dol Guldur into a furnace of shattered stone and boiling shadow. In that clash of will and flame, the likely fate of Dol Guldur is grim. Its physical form, walls, towers, gates, and garrison, would almost certainly fall. Orcs would die in tens of thousands. Nazgul mounts would burn in the sky, and the fortress that once defied the White Council could be reduced in a single day to a smoking ruin. In this path through the hidden centuries, Smaug may actually force Sauron to abandon that stronghold, far earlier than in the tale we know, driving the Dark Lord's presence out of Mirkwood in a storm of fire rather than an elven assault. But here we touch the hard limit. Smaug can burn flesh, melt iron, and topple towers. He cannot burn a shadow. Sauron in this age is not wholly incarnate. His core being, unanchored by the One Ring, can slip the net of tooth and claw. At the moment, Dol Guldur becomes truly untenable. His spirit would thin like smoke, fleeing east and south toward Mordor, gathering itself again in Barad-dûr. The dragon has burned the house, but the ghost that built it has already walked out the back door. And so we are left with a paradox. The most devastating assault Dol Guldur could ever suffer might come not from elves and wizards, but from a greedy, half-mad firedrake who never cared for the fate of Middle-earth at all. Yet even that victory would be incomplete, a glorious ruin masking a deeper failure. Because if Smaug wins this battle, What rises from those ashes next might be far worse for the West than the Dol Guldur we remember. How do you bargain with a dragon who has just proved he can unmake Sauron's fortress, and knows it? Hold on to that question, because as we journey into the next part of this tale, we have to ask, in shattering Dol Guldur, does Smaug accidentally clear the board for Sauron's final move, or for his own? Hook within the flames. What if the White Council arrived too late? So imagine we do not leave that question in the realm of theory. Imagine the board actually breaks. The White Council gathers at last. Their long-delayed assault on Dol Guldur finally agreed. The roads of the Third Age are restless beneath their feet as they move in secret through the darkened world. The grey woods of southern Mirkwood close around them, thick with shadow and spider silk. The air heavy with that ancient, nameless dread that has clung there for centuries. And then the sky turns red, not with dawn, not with storm, but with a rolling bloom of fire that rises beyond the tree line, staining the clouds, beating like a distant, monstrous heart. As we journey into this alternate strand of the tale, the council crests a low ridge and looks south, and Dol Guldur is already burning. Picture it with them. The Black Hill Fortress is wreathed in molten gold and crimson, towers shearing away under hammer blows of living flame. Above it, vast and sinuous, a shadow wheels against the inferno. Wings spread, scales blazing, a river of fire falling from its jaws. Smaug has come first. One terror has been unleashed against another, and none of the wise gave that order. For a heartbeat there is silence among the greatest powers of the West. Gandalf, staff, clenched white. Elrond, who remembers the fall of Barad-dûr, watching another dark stronghold crumble. Galadriel, ancient as the starlight on Cuiviénen, her eyes reflecting dragonfire on Sauron's walls. They had planned a careful siege, a measured unmasking of the necromancer. Instead, they arrive as uninvited witnesses to a catastrophe. What passes across Gandalf's face in that moment? Horror, certainly. Smaug is not bound by any oath, not guided by any counsel. This is no quiet, strategic strike. This is raw, unbridled ruin at the heart of Mirkwood. But there is also a terrible, dangerous hope. Sauron's fortress is being shattered without a single elf arrow loosed, without a single word of power spoken from the council. The story behind the story he has been weaving for decades has taken on a will of its own. And now the stakes twist. If Smaug survives this clash, and dragons of his age and fire do not fall easily, where does that burning gaze turn next? Do they let him wheel south, leaving a trail of ash through the world, trusting that dragonfire has at least wounded their greatest enemy? Or do they intervene, spending their strength not on Sauron, but on the very creature who has just cracked his stronghold open like an egg? All right, dim the lights, get comfortable, because this is where the fate of Middle-earth tilts on a knife edge. Dol Guldur is only the beginning. A dragon who has tasted the fear of the Nazgûl, who has flown through the heart of Sauron's defences, will not be content with a single ruined hill. If Smaug tears himself free of that burning fortress and lives to wheel away into the grey south, his path can only bend toward one place, the black land of Mordor itself. So the question before us is no longer, could Smaug defeat Sauron? It becomes, what happens to an age when Dragonfire and the Dark Lord are set on a collision course and no one is holding the reins? In the next part, we uncover what that collision might truly look like. Scenario 2. Dragon over the Black Land. So now we leave the ruined halls of Erebor behind and lift our eyes to the far horizon, where the world itself seems bruised. We journey into the Black Land. From Smaug's height, the green of Wilderland falls away, the rivers fade, and ahead there is only ash. In the grey distance, Mordor is not merely a place on a map. It is a wound in the earth. From a dragon's eye view, you would see the Eiffel Dueth and the Ash Mountains ringed like broken teeth, hemming in a basin of slag and shadow. The plains of Gorgoroth lie below, ash-choked and fire-scarred, pitted with ancient quarries and smoking vents, as if some forgotten forge still labours beneath the crust. And at the centre, Barad-dûr rises, a spear of darkness driven up from the foundations of the world, its iron crown of battlements pricking the low, poisonous clouds. This is not Dol Guldur. Here Sauron is stronger, his will more concentrated, his armies beyond counting. Even ringless, he has poured centuries of malice into this land, raising walls, towers, trenches, and gates, lacing every road with watchfires and hidden eyes. He is still maimed by the loss of the One, still less than the terrible form he wore in the Second Age, but in Mordor his power is gathered, not scattered. To strike at him here is to fly straight into the heart of the storm, and Mordor is learning to look up. Around the plateau, towers bristle with baleful fires, signalling across the dark like a network of red stars. Great engines of war, mangonels, scorpions, cruel ballistae, could be dragged to the ramparts, their iron bolts and barbed chains turned toward the sky. The Nazgûl ride out from Minas Morgul and the Dark Tower, and though the exact hour when they first take to wing is hidden in the mists of the Third Age, we know their later shapes. Black riders on vast fell beasts answering Sauron's thought in an instant. Pause here for a moment. If you were Smaug, what would you see? A rival throne to be broken? A treasury of iron and slaves to be claimed? Or a cursed furnace so steeped in shadow that even a dragon's pride would hesitate to cross its borders? Smaug is greedy, cruel, and magnificently vain, but he is not a mindless beast. He hoards, he calculates, he survives. To hurl himself against Mordor, he must believe the reward outweighs the risk, or be enraged, deceived, or drawn by a will even greater than his own. So the central test becomes clear. In a direct assault on Mordor, does Smaug's fire and flight give him any realistic chance of tearing at Sauron's true strength? Those inner forges of will and sorcery that anchor Barad-dûr? Or is the Black Land itself designed to swallow even dragons? In our next deep dives into Middle-earth lore, we uncover how such an attack might unfold. The first pass, the answering scream from the Dark Tower, and what happens when ancient fire meets an older, colder shadow. Barad-dûr versus Dragonfire, Siege of the Dark Tower. The first scream is not Smaug's. It is the iron howl of Mordor waking. Gates grind, beacons flare. From the black plain before the Dark Tower, 1,000 forges roar to life as one, answering the distant thunder of wings with a challenge of their own. All right, dim the lights, get comfortable. Let's step together into that vision. A single ancient dragon, born in the first age's afterglow of terror, arrowing south over the broken lands. Behind him lie the grey peaks and forgotten halls of the north. Before him rises Barad-dûr, the fortress that is not merely built, but bound. For Sauron didn't raise this tower by stone and mortar alone. He wove the power of the One Ring into its very foundations, making it an extension of his will, a shadow made solid, so that its ultimate fate is chained to the ring's unmaking. So what happens when raw, living fire meets that kind of sorcery? We journey into the heart of the question. Smaug's breath can melt the side of a mountain, turn dwarven gates to rivers of glowing slag, collapse carved halls that have stood for centuries. We have already seen what he did to Erebor and Dale. Against the lesser works that cluster like barnacles around Barad-dûr, the outer walls, iron gates, watchtowers, siege yards, his fire would be a scythe. Orc encampments would vanish in sheets of white gold flame. Siege engines and supply trains would go up like dry tinder. Picture his first strafing run. Orc hosts drilled to face horse and man suddenly find the sky itself burning. Lines break, banners are consumed. Whole battalions are reduced to ash before they can raise a shield. In those first passes, Smaug is death incarnate, and the military skin of Mordor peels away under his assault. Could any captain of the Dark Lord stand calmly beneath that? Would even the Nazgûl, who hate and fear fire, rush to meet him without a tremor? And yet, at the center of that storm, stands the Dark Tower's core. Here we uncover the story behind the story. Tolkien is explicit. Barad-dûr is only fully destroyed when the ring falls into the cracks of doom. Its endurance is not a matter of stone thickness, but of enchantment. Dragonfire, however ancient, cannot unweave the binding of the ring. Smaug might blacken its outer face, crack parapets, and bring down lesser spires, but the central citadel, the true seat of Sauron's presence, would endure as long as his ring endures. The battlefield becomes a grim equation. On one side, an airborne terror raking the plains, collapsing bridges, silencing forges, turning Mordor's roads into glowing rivers of glass. On the other, endless volleys of arrows and bolts, engines hurling a barbed spears, sorcerous wards, and the focused hatred of a Maya who has studied dragons since the Elder Days. How long before Sauron calls up storms, sends the ring-wraiths on winged mounts, or shapes some darker countermeasure from the depths of his will? In the end, Smaug can scar Mordor. He can ruin its armies, stall its wars, even force Sauron to pull his gaze inward for a time. But he cannot, by fire alone, reach that inner knot of power in Barad-dûr, where the Dark Lord's essence broods. He becomes a catastrophic nuisance, not an existential threat, a wound, not a death blow. Yet even a wound to Mordor might change the fate of Middle-earth. If the Dark Tower is forced to bend, even slightly, what cracks might appear elsewhere in the Shadow's design? The Nazgûl take wing, air war over Mordor. And if the Dark Tower bends even a little, Sauron will not answer with silence. He will answer with wings. For Sauron does have lieutenants that can rise to meet a dragon. Not captains of orcs, not trolls in iron harness, but the 9, ancient kings of men, unmade and remade as Nazgûl, their wills fused to his in a grey, unbreakable chain. They are the deadliest of his servants, moving like knives through the hidden centuries, feared by men, by elves, and by beasts that have never seen the sun eclipsed. In the later days of the Third Age, they do not ride proud horses as they once did. They descend from the clouds on fell beasts, vast, winged creatures, leathery and vulture-like, with jaws that can shear mail and claws that can rake stone. And suddenly, Mordor is not just a land of marching hosts. It is a kingdom with an air force. All right, dim the lights, get comfortable. Let's step together into the black skies above Gorgoroth and imagine what happens when Smaug's red gold fire meets Sauron's black wings. Tolkien tells us something important. The Nazgul fear fire. In their early appearances, torches and kindled brands drive them back. Even the memory of flame unsettles them. That weakness would not simply vanish when faced with a dragon whose very breath can melt the side of a mountain. So they would not sweep in boldly, lances levelled, to strike at Smaug's eyes. They would circle, they would test, they would shriek. Picture Smaug wheeling over Mordor, vast shadow on shadow, his embered belly glowing against the ash-choked clouds. Around him, the ring-wraiths on their fell beasts keep their distance, never quite closing, their cries slicing through the air like knives of despair. They cannot easily be burned from the world, but their mounts can. One gout of dragon fire and a fell beast becomes a screaming comet, tumbling into the slag heaps of Gorgoroth. Yet this is where the story behind the story begins to turn. Smaug is terrifying, but the Nazgul are terror-given will. Their voices gnaw at courage. Their presence presses on the spirit. Even a creature of Morgoth's making is not immune to dread, and Sauron's will, focused through 9 immortal servants, could work on Smaug not as a chain, but as a constant, grinding weight. And above them all, Sauron himself could reach for deeper sorceries, storm winds summoned from the east, veils of unnatural darkness, illusions that twist distance and direction. Not bolts of lightning hurling Smaug from the sky, but a world turned hostile around him. The horizon lost, landmarks swallowed, a dragon's sharp eyes clouded by shadow and malice. In such an air war, Smaug would draw blood. He could kill, maim, and scatter the Nazgul's mounts, leaving ring-wraiths as disembodied malice, driven back to their master. But can he destroy them? Not easily, not permanently. And as the battles lengthen, as the skies themselves seem to lean toward Barad-dûr, the question becomes not whether Smaug can win a single clash, but whether he can endure a campaign. Over days, over weeks, under that relentless spiritual pressure, even a dragon might begin to tire. And if the skies of Mordor slowly turn against him, where does Smaug go when there is nowhere left to land? Pattern interrupt. The day the sky turned red. Where does Smaug go when there is nowhere left to land? Perhaps for a moment we change the answer. The year is late in the Third Age. Over Gondor dawn should be pale and gold, a quiet lifting of the ancient night. Instead, as the watchmen pace the walls of Minas Tirith, the eastern sky blooms into a deep, unnatural red. Not the steady glow of Mount Doom, that dull, familiar wound on the horizon, but a moving fire, a streak of living flame crossing the jagged teeth of the Ethel Duath. At first they think it is some new weapon of the enemy, some vast eruption from the shadow in the east. Then they see it bend, bank, flare, wings, a tail, a river of molten light spilling from a vast, scaled throat. Far beyond the sight of men, yet staining their world, Smaug the Golden passes over the mountain wall and drops like a falling star into Mordor. Within the dark land, confusion ripples faster than any signal fire. Orcs on the plain of Gorgoroth, hardened to ash and smoke, look up and find the sky itself aflame, not with Sauron's will but with an intruding alien blaze. Some flee without orders, running from their own master's realm as if it were collapsing upon them. In Minas Morgul, the cold towers shudder. In their high, haunted chambers, the Nazgul rise in haste, black wings and fell beasts unfurling into the light they hate. In Barad-dûr, the eye turns, not west toward Gondor, not north toward the hidden ring-bearer we know will one day walk those roads, upward, focused. A narrow beam of malice spears the burning heavens, and for the first time in long centuries, Sauron is not the hunter, but the one who has been challenged. Now we journey into the dragon's mind. Smaug tastes ash on the air, thicker and older than the smoke of Erebor, laden with the memory of centuries of war. He feels the pull of that great invisible gaze, pressing against his ancient pride. And he thrills to it. Here, at last, is a power that does not cringe, that does not flatter, that does not offer tribute. Here is a will that would master him, or be broken. He roars and his fire falls upon Gorgoroth. Pits of industry vanish in white heat. Siege engines buckle and run like wax. Orcs scatter in blind panic as dragonfire, hotter than the forges of the lonely mountain, scours trenches and towers. Above him, the Nazgul circle, their fear of flame warring with their terror of their master. Below him, the very land seems to rise, a tide of malice and command, as Sauron's will presses down like a physical weight on wings and bone and thought. For a heartbeat, it is dragon against dark lord, fire against shadow, pride against domination. The fate of Middle-earth hangs in a duel that never was. And then we pull back. This day never dawned in Tolkien's canon. No red sunrise over Gondor, no Smaug over Gorgoroth. But by imagining it, by letting Smaug cross those forbidden mountains, we uncover the story behind the story. The limits of Dragonfire, the reach of Sauron's mind, and how close this age came to a very different war. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, because to know whether Smaug could truly have defied that eye, we have to leave this blazing vision behind and return to the quieter, hidden calculations that shaped the real history of the Third Age. Scenario 3. Sauron with the One Ring. To feel the true scale of this question, we have to imagine the one thing Gandalf feared above almost all others. Not just Sauron restored to open power, but Sauron with the ring back on his hand. Not a shadow in Dol Guldur, not a whisper in the east. A Dark Lord made whole. With that golden circle returned, there is a qualitative leap, not a mere increase in strength. The ring was not a tool he picked up. It was his power poured out and bound to the world. Put it back on, and his native might as a mire surges to its intended height. His will, already terrible, becomes a storm that beats on every mind in Middle-earth. His thought can reach farther, press harder, bend more hearts. Command was always his gift. With a ring, command becomes compulsion, and his presence changes. During The Hobbit, as the necromancer, he lurks in a half-formed guise, testing the world from behind walls and wraiths. But, with the ring restored, we journey into an older, darker imagination. Sauron as he walked in the Second Age, yet more dreadful. Not a lidless eye only, but a fully embodied lord, towering and armoured, a figure sheathed in black mail and blazing with inner fire, no longer needing orcs or Nazgul to speak for him. He would stride the roads of the world like a demigod, a spiritual furnace in visible form. In that age of his full restoration, the physical world itself yields more easily to him. The ring was forged to govern the other rings, yes, but through them it was meant to govern matter and minds. Walls crumble, weapons wither, hearts fail. Think of Barad-dûr rebuilt in a few short decades after his return without the ring. Then imagine what his craft and malice could do when the missing piece of his being is locked again upon his finger. Where then does Smaug stand against this? The dragon is ancient, vast and terrible, one of the last great fire drakes left in the Third Age. His flame can melt the side of a mountain. His wings can darken the skies above entire valleys. His presence alone can unmake the courage of men. But he is still bound to a single body, a creature of Arda's created order. One heart, one mind, one vulnerable chest. Sauron with the ring is something else. He is not merely stronger, he is nearer to the primal powers that shaped the world. Could Smaug's fire scorch his armor? Perhaps. Could he tear down towers and slay captains before the end? Certainly. But could he overthrow that will, that mind, that ring-bound spirit? In any law-respecting reading, the answer bends in one direction. We also had to ask a quieter, more disturbing question. Would Sauron even need to fight? With the ring, his power to dominate leaps beyond kings and ring-bearers. He broke 9 proud lords of men and remade them as Nazgûl, bound to his thought. If that same fully armed will turned on a dragon, on Smaug himself, what happens? Dragons are proud, cunning, slow to yield. Yet pride is exactly what Sauron knows how to hook, twist, and hollow out from within. He might not enslave Smaug in an instant. There could be roaring defiance, fire, a brief and cataclysmic struggle over mountain or plain. But even at his most defiant, Smaug is wrestling not just a sorcerer, but a being whose essence is braided into the fate of Middle-earth. Sooner or later, the dragon becomes either a carcass on the ash or something far worse, a ringwraith-like servant, a winged terror whose flame now flies at his master's command. So in this extreme scenario, Smaug versus Sauron with the ring is not truly a contest. The dragon is, at best, a troublesome beast to be broken. At worst, he becomes the ultimate weapon of the Dark Lord's new war. But here is the hidden catch. For all this nightmare power, the ring also chains Sauron in ways even he cannot escape. And to see how that weakness might open the smallest crack for resistance, we have to step away from dragons and look again at hobbits, at mercy, and at a very different fire on a very different mountain. Could Smaug destroy Sauron's body? So we step away from hobbits for a moment, but we keep that same question of limits and weakness in our hands. If mercy and a little ring-bearer can unmake Sauron in the end, what could raw, terrible power do in the meantime? Could Smaug at least burn the Dark Lord's body out of the world, even if he could not touch the ancient will behind it? To answer that, we journey into an earlier age of ruin. At the end of the Second Age, on the black slopes of Orodruin, Sauron comes forth in a vast, terrible form, great and dark, bearing the One Ring. He is cast down when Isildur cuts the ring from his hand. His towering body is destroyed. The physical shape that had cowed nations collapses. But the will that wore it does not die. Sauron's spirit endures, a shadow blown on the wind, unable for long years to take fair or mighty form, yet not annihilated while the ring survives. From that moment on, every embodiment of Sauron is already a kind of compromise. In the Third Age, the wise speak of him as the necromancer in Dol Guldur, a lurking presence that can be driven out when Gandalf's discovery and the White Council's assault force him to flee east, Later, in Mordor, he is both the Dark Lord in the Barad-dûr, and in another sense, the Eye, a vast, searching awareness. Tolkien hints that these are not two beings, but two faces of the same power. A will that can inhabit armor and throne, yet also stretch out as a disembodied gaze over the world. That means something important for our dragon. When we talk about Smaug facing Sauron, we are not asking whether dragonfire can burn a ghost. We are asking whether, if Sauron once more takes on a visible, vulnerable shape in Dol Guldur or in Mordor, that body could be broken as his earlier one was. And here dragonfire suddenly becomes very interesting. Smaug's breath melts stone, runs gold like water, shatters the gates of Erebor. If that same fire crashed against a fortress where Sauron walked in armor, is it really impossible that the body would burn? The Nazgul fear fire. Orcs shrivel before it. Even the great works of Barad-dûr are not described as indestructible by heat. Yet here is the story behind the story, the hidden catch that echoes the last alliance. Destroy the body, and the spirit still remains. Even if Smaug's flames blasted apart Sauron's current form, the Dark Lord's will would likely recoil, discorporate, and slowly gather again, as long as the ring endures somewhere in the wild. So at best, Smaug offers a partial victory. He might win a battle, might empty Dol Guldur or crack the Dark Towers for a generation, changing the roads the War of the Ring would later take. But he cannot win the War of Annihilation. That belongs not to dragons and fire from below, but to a different fire on a different mountain, and to hands far smaller than Smaug's terrible claws. And that raises a final question we have to face. If Smaug could only ever burn the shell, what happens if they meet with no ring in play at all? The dragon's weakness, arrows, age, and hubris. If Smaug and Sauron ever meet with no ring in play, we have to remember something uncomfortable. Smaug is not invincible. His legend feels ancient and untouchable, but his actual end comes from a very mortal place. A man on a city wall, a bow, and a single black arrow. In the grey night over Lake Town, Smaug wheels in fury, fire painting the water in molten gold. He believes himself unassailable, armoured in scales that have turned aside countless blades. Yet one thrush carries a forgotten scrap of knowledge. One man listens, and Bard the bowman aims at the small, unarmoured patch in the hollow of the dragon's left breast. One shot, one weakness, one fall. The side of the lonely mountain may have melted under his fire, but his body still obeys the same fate as all creatures of the world, a vulnerable point and an ending. That scene is not just a dramatic death, it is the story behind the story of Smaug's whole character. For centuries he has lain on his hoard, half asleep in red and golden shadow, dreaming of his own greatness. He has grown fat on fear, complacent on treasure and blind to the small. A hobbit, a thrush, a single arrow from a man he mocked. These are beneath his notice, until they are not. And by the time he realizes his mistake, the age of dragons is over. Now imagine Sauron watching that same pattern. We journey into a different kind of battlefield here, one made of will and whispers rather than claws. Sauron thrives on what Smaug despises, the hidden, the patient, the insignificant. If he cannot dominate the dragon's mind outright, he can still send gnats that Smaug will not swat until too late. A single emissary with flattery. A captive bearing rumours of a rival horde. A ring of towers baiting Smaug into a narrow killing ground where engines, sorcery and Nazgul wait in the dark. Would Smaug even believe such things could threaten him? And then there is the body. Smaug must rest. He must feed. His wings can tear. His eyes can be blinded. His belly, we know, can be pierced. A sudden raid on Dale or Lake Town is one kind of flight, but a long campaign over the ash plains of Mordor, over poisoned airs and jagged roads, under a constant rain of darts, spears, and dark enchantments. Even a great dragon would tire, and Sauron's strength lies in not tiring. Smaug is terrifying at a single night's work. Sauron is terrifying over centuries. One is a storm, the other is climate. And in a war of attrition, of logistics, of grinding will against will, the dragon who cannot imagine defeat is exactly the one most likely to be maneuvered into it. All right, dim the lights, get comfortable, because this leaves us with a sharper question. If Smaug can be killed by one arrow and outweighted by one Dark Lord, is there any path at all where he truly walks away the victor? Hook, the one chance to burn the Dark Lord? So we come back to that unsettler's image, a dragon who can be felled by one black arrow, and a Dark Lord who can be worn down over centuries. If both can be beaten, then the question that really matters isn't who wins in a cage match, but who can tilt the age while they still draw breath. Up to now, we've walked the long roads of comparison. We've seen that Smaug's power is devastating but localized. A single mountain, a single valley, an entire region turned into a wasteland by fire, flight, and fear. His is the terror that melts stone and kingdoms in the same breath, but only as far as his wings can carry him, and his greed can be bothered to go. Sauron, by contrast, is resilient and distributed, a grey shadow that seeps into courts, strongholds, and hearts. He can lose his body, lose his ring, lose his tower, and still lurk on, rebuilding. We've also uncovered the limits on both sides. Smaug is nearly immune to ordinary weapons, but not to a well-aimed shaft or a lucky chink in his hoard-forged mail. Sauron, ringless, can still dominate minds and marshal armies, yet he cannot simply snap his fingers and unmake a great fire drake who does not wish to be ruled. So the old framing, could Smaug kill Sauron forever, starts to feel like the wrong legend. The sharper question is this: could there have been one moment, one narrow hinge in the hidden centuries, when Smaug might not have ended Sauron, but wounded him so deeply at so precise a time that the entire War of the Ring would unfold differently? Not ultimate victory, but decisive disruption. Not the end of evil, but a hard reset of the board. And that pulls us, almost inevitably, toward Dol Guldur. Picture that stronghold in southern Mirkwood, the necromancer's lair before Barad-dûr rises again, before the Eye crowns the Black Tower. Here Sauron is weaker, still recovering from the loss of the One Ring, not yet enthroned in Mordor, his power concentrated in a single fortress rather than spread across the whole world. Now set that against another detail of the timeline. Smaug, newly awakened in the north, his fires hot enough to melt the side of Erebor, his wrath still fresh, his ambition unspent. For a brief overlap of years, those two arcs cross. A Dark Lord not yet entrenched, a dragon not yet slain. If, in that window, dragonfire had rained on Dol Guldur, if Smaug's pride or provocation had driven him south instead of merely brooding over gold, could Sauron have been forced into another disembodiment, another long retreat into the dark? Even a temporary banishment at that stage might have bought the West crucial centuries. Gondor could have recovered. The White Council might have acted without the Nazgul at full strength. Sauron's strategy, delayed or diverted, might never have converged on a hobbit in the Shire at exactly the wrong moment. All right, dim the lights. Get comfortable, because in the next part, we journey into that fork in the road and follow its ripples, the story behind the story, where a dragon's fire really does burn the necromancer out of the world, if only for a time, and the fate of Middle-earth bends in a different direction. Between two evils, the free people's caught in the middle. So imagine this alternate road actually taken. Smaug does not fall over Lake Town. He wheels south, and for a little while the sky itself becomes a battlefield. Word of that reaches the free peoples not as tidy news, but as fragments, a red glare far off, tremors in the earth, strange rumours along the old trading lanes. And at once, every realm between the Grey Mountains and Gondor has to decide which terror it fears more. In the north, the reaction would be raw and immediate. Dale has only just been rebuilt from ash. Erebor's gates still remember dragonfire baked into the stone. The woodland realm has watched Mirkwood blacken under the necromancer's shadow and paid in lives to hold the dark at bay. For them, hearing that Smaug has flown against Dol Guldur or even Mordor is not an abstract strategic question. Do you cheer when the monster that burned your grandfathers now burns your enemy? Or do you shudder knowing that if he survives, that same ancient flame may wheel back over your own rooftops? Bard and Dain would likely send scouts, not celebrations, because for those who live in Dragonfire's wake, victory is measured in what is left standing. Further south, in the plains of Rohan and the white towers of Gondor, the calculus grows colder. Gondor has watched Mordor for centuries and knows that even a distracted Sauron is a terrible neighbour. A dragon loose in the east might feel, for a heartbeat, like an unexpected ally, a living siege engine hammering at the dark land. But what happens when Barad-dûr is damaged, its hosts scattered, and Smaug turns his golden eyes westward? Rohan, with open sky and no mountain fastness, would see only a new front. Horse herds and thatch are tinder to a fire drake. So while some captains in Minas Tirith might whisper that one great evil buying them time is worth the risk, the wiser would see that the fate of Middle-earth cannot rest on which tyrant happens to be facing the other way. Among the Eldar, the judgment would be sharper still. Elrond, who remembers the First Age, and Galadriel, who has walked through older shadows, would understand that a clash of monsters does not cleanse the world. It merely rearranges the ruins. They might even prefer a wounded, watchable Sauron, pinned to his tower and bound by his own ring law, over an unringed, unruled Smaug, roaming wherever his greed or malice leads. We journey into the minds of those who have seen Morgoth fall, and know that power without purpose is merely another storm to endure. And the dwarves, their hearts would be divided like a broken hoard. Many would welcome Smaug's death at anyone's hand, even Sauron's, just as others might secretly relish the thought of the dragon's scorching orc-holds and dark fortresses. Yet every outcome that leaves either the necromancer triumphant over the north or a dragon enthroned over the blasted east is a poisoned victory. The gold might be reclaimed, but the age would belong to fear. Only the hobbits tucked in their hidden shire might not hear of this war of titans at all, at least not at first. But even their quiet roads would not remain untouched if the Third Age becomes a wrestling ground for fire and shadow. Villages, not citadels, burn easiest. So as we uncover this imagined duel, we have to ask, what if the real danger is not who wins, but how much of the world survives their contest at all? And in the next part, we'll follow that danger to its darkest possibility, where one victor does emerge, and the free peoples discover that they have misjudged which ending is truly the worst. Would the Valar intervene? So if the worst ending is not victory but survival through ruin, we have to lift our eyes beyond dragons and dark lords and ask a harder question. Who, if anyone, would stop them? Not the Dunedain, not the Eldar, but the powers beyond the sea, the ancient rulers of Arda itself. Here we journey into a higher tier of the story behind the story, where the grey mists over the sea matter more than the flames on the battlefield. Because the Valar have intervened before, and when they do, the world breaks. The downfall of Numenor, the drowning of an entire island kingdom, is the last time they act directly in the Third Age's memory. And after that cataclysm, they draw back, leaving Middle-earth to its own roads and its own wounds. From that moment, they choose a different way. No more War of Wrath, no more hosts of the West marching beneath the lifted sun. Instead, they send the Istari, Gandalf, Saruman, Radagast, the forgotten blue wizards, clothed in weakness, bound by rules. Their power is now persuasion, not command, patience, not earthquakes. And for nearly 3,000 years, while Sauron regathers his strength and Smaug coils in his mountain lair, the Valar watch, but they do not stride into the tale. It matters that both Sauron and Smaug are Morgoth's legacy. The Dark Lord is his greatest lieutenant, the dragons his engines of fire and fear, both born from that first ancient rebellion against the music. In a sense, the Third Age is the long aftershock of Morgoth's fall, the hidden centuries in which his corruption ripples outward through men, orcs, dragons, and rings. The Valar have decided that this echo must fade within history itself, not be silenced by another divine hammer blow. So would a Smaug-Sauron war change their minds. Imagine the skies of Rhovanion blackened, cities turned to ash, Dol Guldur shattered and rebuilt, armies of orcs and easterlings crushed beneath falling dragons and tidal waves of fear. The devastation might begin to resemble, in miniature, the ruin of Beleriand. We uncover an eerie parallel, a world again on the brink, again threatened by powers born from the same ancient shadow. And yet, all the evidence suggests the Valar would still refuse a second war of wrath. Their concern is no longer to pick winners in monstrous duels, but to let freedom, courage, and pity work themselves out within the circles of the world. Direct force would unmake too much, too quickly. But that does not mean silence. If Smaug's fire cracked Sauron's armor, if the Dark Lord's attention faltered for a moment, who would be ready to move? Gandalf with Narya, stirring hearts against despair. Galadriel, keeper of one of the three, reading the turns of fate from Lorien's mirror. Elrond, healer and strategist, gathering what remnants he could. The Valar might not send storms, but they could strengthen these wise, nudge a hobbit's courage, or place a ranger at the right crossroads. All right, dim the lights, get comfortable, because here's the unsettling pattern. Interrupt. The Valar are not rooting for Smaug against Sauron. They're not watching the arena. They are watching the long healing of Middle-earth. Two great evils destroying each other may open a door, but it is still the free peoples who must walk through it. So as we step together into the next part, we'll follow that door opening. If Dragonfire did weaken the Dark Lord, what chances and what terrible temptations would that give to those still fighting in the light? Gandalf's long game. A missed opportunity or a necessary avoidance? And this is where we have to pause at the door we've just opened and ask, who is really standing in the doorway? A dragon or a grey pilgrim who has spent centuries making sure doors like this never open too wide? Because when we journey into Gandalf's choices, the whole question of Smaug versus Sauron begins to feel slightly wrong. Gandalf is an Istar, an emissary of the West, and his mission is not to stride into the arena and hurl power against power, not to match Sauron blow for blow. He is sent to Middle-earth to stir hearts, to awaken courage, to weave alliances between scattered peoples who have forgotten their own strength. Not a warlord, not a general, a counsellor walking forgotten roads. For nearly 2,000 years of the Third Age, he lives that out. He carries Narya, the Ring of Fire, not to burn cities, but to kindle hope. He befriends hobbits. He listens to old songs. He plants ideas that will only bear fruit long after the singers are dead. And when the shadow in Dol Guldur grows, his instinct is not to find a darker shadow to throw against it, but to quietly weaken Sauron's board before the final game is ever played. That is the story behind the story of The Hobbit. When Gandalf looks at Smaug, he does not see a potential champion against the necromancer. He sees a catastrophe waiting to be claimed. If Sauron ever wins the Lonely Mountain, wins that horde, wins that dragon, the North collapses. So he does something that feels almost small. He nudges a company of displaced dwarves and one startled hobbit toward a lair of ancient fire, just to remove a piece from Sauron's future arsenal. Could he have tried to turn Smaug south to bait dragon against Dark Lord? Everything we know about him says no. He is horrified when Saruman dreams of mastering Sauron through the ring. He will not touch the ring himself, even when the fate of Middle-earth hangs in the balance. He has watched across ages how evil used as a tool does not remain a tool. It becomes the master. So in a hypothetical Smaug-Sauron war, Gandalf might glimpse opportunity, a wounded Dark Lord, scattered servants, but he would also see a sky on fire, shattered kingdoms, and a victor, dragon or shadow, who might be even harder to reach with pity, with counsel, with any appeal to the light. All right, dim the lights, get comfortable, because in Gandalf's eyes there is another road, a quieter one. The road of hobbits and hidden courage, of a ring carried not to a rival tyrant, but into the very fires that forged it. As we uncover that road, we'll see why to this grey wanderer, a duel between monsters is never the true hope of the world. If Smaug had lived, the War of the Ring, rewritten. And that road only exists because another one was closed, because one glittering, terrible possibility was buried under the ruins of a mountain and the ashes of a dragon's heart. Imagine for a moment that it was not. Imagine that when the War of the Ring begins, Smaug is still alive, coiled in Erebor's halls, or brooding in some new lair to the south, a living volcano with wings. In that world, as we journey into the hidden centuries of what might have been, Sauron's great map of conquest looks very different. On its northern edge, beyond the grey wastes and the ash of Mordor, there is a single crimson question mark, the last great fire drake of the Third Age. What does the Dark Lord do with that? Does he dare to treat Smaug as a vassal, sending ringwraiths under shadow to parley in the ruined dale? Does he gamble on confrontation, hurling orc hosts and fell beasts against a creature whose fire could melt the side of the lonely mountain? Or, most dangerously of all, does he decide to leave the dragon alone, hoping Smaug's greed will keep him neutral while Mordor breaks Gondor and Rohan? Each path is a risk. An alliance might fail, and an offended dragon is not a safe neighbour. A war in the north might drain armies he needs at Minas Tirith. Ignoring Smaug leaves an unpredictable rival perched behind his own advancing Easterlings. Now look north with us. Dale, Erebor, the Iron Hills, Thranduil's woodland realm. In our world they become a hard, bright shield against Sauron's eastern road. But under Smaug's shadow, they are not allies, they are prey. Bard never wins his kingly line. Dine Ironfoot never marches. The men of Dale never rebuild their walls. The elven king, already wary, must spend his strength warding off fire from the mountain, rather than orcs from Dol Guldur. The northern theatre, which in the real history bleeds Mordor white with Easterling dead, becomes a wasteland of tribute and terror, too busy surviving a dragon to resist a Dark Lord. And what of the Ring's wanderings? Could Gandalf, Elrond, or Aragorn even contemplate sending a hobbit through the vales of Anduin or near the old roads east if Smaug still ruled the heights? Would the Fellowship dare any northern route with a sky tyrant who can see for miles and smell gold and fear on the wind? More likely, every plan tightens around the south, forcing them closer to Sauron's direct gaze, stripping away the quiet back paths that made the story behind the story possible. So we uncover a strange truth. Smaug's death is not just a local victory for dwarves and lakemen. It is the clearing of a strategic horizon. One evil is removed so that the free peoples can even imagine uniting against another. Without Dale reborn, without Erebor free, without Dine at the council and Bard's heirs in the east, the fragile coalition that answers the beacons may never exist. And yet, if that dragon had lived, might his fire have turned in the end against Mordor itself? Might the fate of Middle-earth have hung on a single wounded greed? In the next part, we'll follow that dangerous thought all the way to the Black Gates. The nature of evil. Why Sauron outlasts dragons. And yet, to answer that dangerous thought, we have to pull back from the clash of fire and shadow and ask a quieter question. What kind of evil actually rules an age? Smaug fills the sky. Sauron fills the world. Those are not the same thing. Dragons in Tolkien are ancient weapons from a darker war, forged by Morgoth to break cities and terrify armies. They are greed given wings. They hoard, they burn, they blight a single valley or a single mountain. Smaug devastates Dale and Erebor, but beyond the Long Lake his terror already begins to thin. This is dragon evil, local, blazing, catastrophic, and strangely provincial. Sauron's evil is of another order. He does not merely destroy, he arranges. He wants roads, fortresses, slave armies, a grey lattice of fear binding every free people. Not a pile of gold under a mountain, but a ring on every neck. By the time of The Hobbit, that difference is written into the very age. Smaug is one of the last of his kind, a roaring echo of the First Age, when winged fire laid waste to Beleriand. He is a relic of Morgoth's first rebellion, coiled on his forgotten hoard while the centuries slide past outside. Sauron, by contrast, is still evolving. Cast down in the War of the Last Alliance, stripped of the ring, he returns as the necromancer of Dol Guldur, testing new shapes, new servants, new strategies. Dragon evil fades. Dark Lord evil adapts. Here, Tolkien's Catholic imagination quietly shapes the story behind the story. Evil is not a rival light, but a wound in the good, a parasitic twisting of something that should be whole. Smaug's greed pins him physically to the treasure he covets. The more he loves it, the less he can leave it. Sauron's will to dominate binds him to the One Ring in the same way. The more of himself he pours into it, the more helpless he becomes without it. Both are self-defeating. Yet which parasite can infest more of the world? And this is where Sauron becomes the more frightening precisely because he is less spectacular. Smaug announces himself with thunder and flame. Sauron works through papers, oaths, offices, the slow corruption of kings. He turns Númenórean pride into tyranny. He twists the Nine into Nazgûl. He seeps into councils and palaces and guilds. You do not always see him coming. Often you sign his contract. All right, dim the lights, get comfortable, because this is the pattern interrupt Tolkien offers us. In his moral universe, the greatest threats are not always the ones breathing fire. Smaug can be answered with a single black arrow at the right moment. Sauron cannot be met by force alone, because he has already sunk roots into the very structures that wield that force. So when we journey into the question, could Smaug have defeated Sauron? We are really touching a deeper anxiety about the fate of Middle-earth. A dragon might scorch Dol Guldur. He cannot burn out the will to domination itself. That, Tolkien insists, must be unmade in a humbler way, on smaller roads, by hands that refuse both hoard and ring. In the next section, we'll test this against the battlefield itself and ask, in raw tactical terms, what happens when Dragonfire meets the Dark Lord's designs? Final verdict: could Smaug have defeated Sauron? So now we come to it plainly. Not just who would win in a flashy duel, not Dragonfire versus dark sorcery as a spectacle, but the harder question beneath the smoke. In any real, lived scenario of that age, Dol Guldur, the open sky, or the black land of Mordor itself, could Smaug actually end Sauron as a threat to the fate of Middle-earth? Dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's step together into that final reckoning. In Dol Guldur, at the height of the Hobbit era, we have perhaps Smaug's best chance. The necromancer is not yet enthroned in Barad-dûr. He has no ring. His body is a tenuous shell, a shadow made dense. Here, if Smaug flew south in wrath, his fire could melt the very hill, shatter walls, and scour every tower. We journey into an image of blazing ruin. Orcs burned, wargs scattered, the fortress cracked and choking with ash. In such a storm, Sauron's assumed form might well be driven out, even torn apart, his presence in that place broken. The White Council needed careful planning and combined might to achieve what a single dragon could do in an afternoon of fury. Smaug could devastate Dol Guldur. He could force Sauron to flee early, to abandon a key stronghold, to lose centuries of hidden work. But even here, at his most vulnerable, the Dark Lord's spirit would not be annihilated. He would stream away invisible to the east or to Mordor, diminished but unmade. No, only dislodged. What of Mordor then? What if Smaug, enraged and unbound, crossed the Ephel-Duath and descended upon the Ash Plains? In open war, his terror would be unimaginable. orc hosts would break, siege engines would melt, the slagged roads to the Morannon would run with fire. Even the Nazgul, who fear flame, might hesitate to close with such a creature. For a time, the balance of the world could tilt. Armies meant for Gondor might be spent merely surviving their own master's new enemy. And yet, at the heart of that land stands Barad-dûr, its foundations laid with ancient sorcery, its power rooted not only in stone, but in the One Ring itself. Dragonfire can melt a mountain's side. It cannot burn a bond wrought by Eru-permitted craft at the dawn of the Second Age. As long as the ring endures, Sauron's essence is anchored. He may be scattered, but he is not ended. This is the metaphysical limit our deep dives into Middle-earth lore keep circling back to. Smaug can wound plans, topple fortresses, delay the war by years or even centuries. He can do what great beasts do, ruin the visible. He cannot reach into that hidden place where will and ring are fused. That road must be walked by smaller feet. So our final verdict is double-edged. Could Smaug defeat Sauron's current schemes, shatter his strongholds, and redraw the map of the Third Age? Yes, dramatically so. Could he, alone, do what a hobbit with a burden of gold finally does? Break the Dark Lord's power beyond recovery? No. For that, fire in the sky is not enough. You need mercy on a ledge, pity in a tunnel, and the quiet courage to unmake, not to hoard. In the next section, we'll turn that lens back on Gandalf himself and uncover why, knowing all this, he chose burglars and riddles over dragons and doom. Reframing the tale we know, Smaug's absence, Sauron's fall. So when we turn from dragons and doom back to the tale we know, something almost eerie happens. In The Lord of the Rings, Smaug is gone. No one speaks his name. No bard sings his fall. The age has moved on, and the deadliest fire in the north is now only an absence, a silence behind the grey mountains. Yet that silence shapes the war. Because when we journey into the War of the Ring, the northern board is strangely clear. No great winged shadow haunts the iron hills. No ancient worm coils above Dale. The free peoples of the north can march, trade, and send aid without forever glancing up at a red glare in the sky. The story does not pause to tell you this, but the fate of Middle-earth has already been altered by a dragon's last scream over Lake Town. Think of the chain, a hobbit's courage to creep down a dark tunnel. A riddle, a cup, a stolen moment of nerve. Then Bard standing on a creaking rooftop while his world burns, loosing one black arrow into a chink of bare scale. Not a host, not a high king, but a single archer guided by an old thrush and the remnants of an ancient line. From that shot come the ruins, and then the rebirth of Dale, the restoration of Erebor, and a river of gold and goods that will later arm men and dwarves against Sauron's northern assaults. When Easterlings and orcs surge out in that final war, they do not find a scattered people hiding in wooden halls. They meet Dine Ironfoot's dwarves and Bard's descendants, hardened by fire, rich in mail and weapons beaten in the forges under the mountain. We uncover here the story behind the story. Bilbo's adventure becomes siege engines, spearheads, and a shield wall that holds when the shadow stretches long. There is a pattern here almost hidden in the wanderings of this world. Great evils do not fall to greater evils. Smaug is not slain by a rival dragon, but by one man with one arrow. Sauron is not overthrown by some titanic monster, but by a hobbit's endurance, by pity on a wretched creature at the very brink. Again and again, not the clash of titans, but the small, stubborn act in the dark. And that is why Tolkien never gives us the spectacle our imaginations keep inventing. No Smaug versus Sauron in the sky above Mordor. No dragonfire on Barad-dûr. He is less interested in monsters devouring monsters than in whether a frightened burglar will go back for his friends, or whether a ring-bearer will spare an enemy he has every reason to hate. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, and the next time you read these books, let's step together into them with this in mind. Smaug is not a missed weapon against the Dark Lord, but a necessary obstacle removed so that a quieter, stranger victory can unfold. Because when we follow Gandalf's grey roads in the next section, we'll see just how deliberately he wagers everything on that quieter path, and what nearly breaks when that gamble comes due. Cozy Epilogue. By the fire in Rivendell. So we leave the maps and measures behind for a moment and come back to the fire. The Council of Elrond has long since broken. The great voices are gone to their chambers, the echoes of doom and decision fading into the carved rafters of that ancient house. Only a few remain, a ranger by the wall, a hobbit or two drowsing in high-backed chairs, and you and we, gathered close as the logs burn low and the grey embers glow. Someone speaks into the quiet, not loudly. But what if the dragon had lived? What if Smaug had flown south against the Dark Lord? The question hangs there, fragile as smoke. You can almost see the shape of it in the air. Across the hearth, an old figure stirs. Gandalf, or some other lore master of the hidden centuries, leans on his staff and watches the last flames. When he answers, it is not with a laugh and not with a shudder, but with that measured tone that has carried through so many ages. "You are not the first to ask," he says, "nor will you be the last." He reminds them and us of what we have already seen in this story behind the story. Smaug, last of the great fire drakes, whose breath could melt the side of Erebor, and whose shadow alone could break the courage of armies. Sauron, the necromancer of Dol Guldur in those days, still groping toward his full power, yet already a will that could darken whole regions of the world. On one side, ancient fire and wings. On the other, a mind like a burning eye and legions waiting in the dark. Had they met as enemies, the wizard says, the earth itself might have trembled. For a while, the fate of Middle-earth might have seemed to hang between claw and ring, between dragonfire and shadow. He lets that image stand, Smaug wheeling over Dol Guldur, Nazgul shrinking from his flame, orc hosts scattering under falling ruin. It is an awe that tastes almost sweet. Almost. Then comes the soft interruption. "But tell me," he asks quietly, "if such a battle had been won, what then? Would the ring be less perilous? Would the hearts of men be less easily swayed? Would a dragon gorged on victory be a gentler master?" Here the mood shifts. We journey into a different kind of reckoning. The listeners remember that dragons were Morgoth's own devices, that evil cannot be safely turned against itself without a price. A world where Smaug humble Sauron might only trade one tyranny for another, one burning eye for another blazing maw. The roads to Mordor cannot be walked by proxy. Gandalf's gaze turns inevitably to the hobbits by the fire. In the end, he says, it was not for dragons or dark lords to decide this age, but for the small and the stubborn, and for the friendships, they would not betray. The spectacle belongs to the great. The victory this time belonged to the humble. That is the hidden wisdom we uncover in these deep dives into Middle-earth lore. Outside, night gathers in the ravine, and the windows of Rivendell show only stars and the faint rush of the Brunnen below. Within, the last embers crumble. Questions remain, as they always will in such a world, half answered, half forgotten, wandering through the histories. All right, dim the lights, get comfortable, because from this quiet hearth, the grey roads are already calling us onward, back into Gandalf's long wanderings and the choices that shaped all that followed. Your turn. Who wins in your Middle-earth? So before we vanish entirely back into the grey, let's hand the road over to you. We've walked the hidden centuries and weighed dragonfire against shadow, but in the end, this is your Middle-earth, as much as Tolkien's. The fate of Middle-earth in these great what-if tales lives in your imagination first. So tell us, in your world, who wins when Smaug wings his way south to Dol Guldur? Picture the necromancer in his ruined stronghold, still without the ring, half-veiled, half-revealed, a terrible will bound to a fragile form. Do you see Smaug's ancient fire crashing through the black towers, melting stone as it did the side of the lonely mountain? Or do you imagine Sauron's sorcery and fear breaking the dragon's pride from within, turning that vast red-gold terror into just another weapon in his hand? And if one falls, what ripples out toward Gondor, toward Rohan, toward the quiet paths of the Shire? Then shift the sky. High over Mordor, with the ring still lost, who claims the world? Smaug alone, the last great firedrake of the Third Age, circling above Barad-dûr's foundations, raining ruin on orc legions and siege engines. Or Sauron, ringless but still terrible, calling Nazgûl on winged horrors, sending a storm of arrows, spears, and poisoned words into that dragon's mind? Tell us, not just who you think wins, but how. Does Gondor wake to a red dawn under dragon rule? Does Rohan ride against a tyrant in the clouds? Does the Shire remain a forgotten corner? Or does Smaug's shadow reach even to that green door on Bagshot Row? And then, the darkest road, Sauron, with the One Ring restored. In that age, does any power stand against him? Could Smaug's fire burn even a ring-wielding Dark Lord from the world? Or would the dragon at last bow, his will broken by a presence older and more terrible than Morgoth's forges? If Sauron triumphs there, what becomes of Minas Tirith's white walls, of Meduseld's golden hall, of the party tree? If Smaug prevails, what kind of age of ash and gold follows? We'd love for you to go deep here. Give us your own story behind the story. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and in the comments, sketch your battles, your endings, your quiet epilogues for the West. If you've enjoyed journeying into these grey roads with us tonight, tap that like button. It tells the wandering algorithm spirits to send more travellers our way. Subscribe if you'd like more deep dives into Middle-earth lore, more dragons, more wizards, more forgotten choices that bent the world. Share this with a friend who loves to argue in the dark about impossible matchups. And if you want to keep walking, we've left other roads open for you. A whole exploration of whether the Balrog could have defeated Smaug, and another on what Gandalf was really doing for 2,000 years before a hobbit ever found a ring in the dark. Let's step together into those next, if your eyes are still open. For now, thank you for walking this long road with us, wherever and whenever you're listening. May your night be quiet, and may you rest under gentler stars than those that once shone on dragons and dark lords. Appendix A. Lore sources and canon boundaries. Before we journey into dragons and dark lords crossing fire and shadow, we should be honest about the roads we're walking. Not every stone on this path is laid by Tolkien's own hand. Some are carved in ancient ink, others in careful inference, and a few in the dim light of what-if imagination. Our firmest ground is the primary tales. The Hobbit gives us Smaug himself, his sighs beneath the lonely mountain, his fire-melting stone, his vanity and sudden, murderous rage. The Lord of the Rings, especially the appendices, gives us the age around him. Sauron as the necromancer of Dol Guldur, the White Council, the slow gathering of the ring-wraiths, and the shadow in the east. The Silmarillion reaches further back, to the first dragons of Morgoth, so that we can weigh Smaug against Glaurung and the winged terrors of the First Age and feel where he stands in that terrible lineage. Then we step into the half-lit halls of unfinished tales and the history of Middle-earth. Here we uncover variant drafts of the quest of Erebor, glimpses of Gandalf explaining in plain words why a Sauron-Smaug alliance would have broken the back of the West, and notes that hint at how Sauron's power waxed and waned without the One Ring. These are not polished stories, but they are the story behind the story, and they let us see how Tolkien thought about his own world when he was off the main road. Alongside the books stand the letters. In his private correspondence, Tolkien speaks more directly about dragons as corrupted fire spirits, about Sauron's will and the metaphysics of the ring, about what the Dark Lord could or could not do without his lost master weapon. When we talk about Sauron's ability to dominate lesser minds, or about whether Smaug could have been bent or would have had to be broken, we are often leaning on those grey, thoughtful pages rather than on dialogue from the published tales. So what counts as canon in a deep dive into Middle-earth lore like this? Hard canon is where Tolkien is explicit. Smaug's death by Bard's arrow, Sauron's return to Mordor, the Nazgul's fear of fire. Soft canon is where the implications are strong but not spelled out, such as Smaug being one of the last great dragons, or Sauron's bodily weakness while he is still the necromancer. Beyond that lies imaginative extrapolation. Battle scenarios at Dol Guldur, in open sky, or before Barad-dûr, built carefully from what we know, but never directly described in the texts. Different readers will weigh these layers differently. Some will rank Smaug's power nearer to the dragons of the First Age. Others will see Sauron's embodied form as more or less vulnerable. That's part of the fascination, isn't it? The fate of Middle-earth is shaped in these gaps as much as in the written lines. All through this we've tried not to break Tolkien's world, even when we bend it. The what-if remains anchored to what he actually wrote, so that when we finally let Smaug's fire fall upon Sauron's shadow, we're still standing within the circles of his imagined world. In the next section, we'll take that framework and begin to weigh Smaug himself, his age, his fire, his fear, and where this last great dragon truly stands among the monsters of the ancient days. Appendix B. Comparing Smaug to Glaurung and Anchalagan. So now that we've set our rules and drawn our circles, we can finally ask, where does Smaug actually stand among the true terrors of dragonkind? To weigh him against Sauron, we first have to weigh him against the shadows that came before him. In those ancient, half-forgotten wars, when dragons first walked the world. Dim the lights, get comfortable because we journey into the First Age for a moment to meet Glaurung. He is the father of dragons, unleashed by Morgoth long before wings and storm cloud battles. Glaurung cannot fly, but he does not need to. He crawls like a living siege engine, leading the sack of Nargothrond, breaking its gates, scattering its warriors, and turning a hidden elven stronghold into a grave. His fire is terrible, yet his greatest weapon is not flame, but mind. With a gaze and a word he freezes Turin, twists his choices, and later, on the road above Brethil, he strips Nienna's memory away, leaving her wandering in grey despair. This is domination not of walls, but of wills. Then, much later in those same hidden centuries comes Ankalagan the Black. If Glaurung is a crawling doom, Ankalagan is the storm itself. In the War of Wrath, when the Valar at last move openly against Morgoth, Ankalagan leads the winged dragons, rising like a dark cloud over the hosts of the west. The eagles of Manwë and Erendil, in his shining ship, must battle him in the very airs of the world. When Ankalagan finally falls, his body smashes the triple peaks of Thangorodrim. That single image tells us almost everything. This is not merely a monster, but a living mountain of fire and iron, implied to be the mightiest of all dragonkind. Where then do we place Smaug the Golden? He is later smaller, a relic of fading power in a third age that has forgotten the full terror of the first. He cannot match Glaurung's intricate psychological webs, nor Ankalagan's apocalyptic scale. Yet he is still called a great dragon, with both devastating fire and flight in an age when such creatures are nearly extinct. His flames melt the side of the lonely mountain. His shadow alone can break the courage of Lake Town. He toys with Bilbo's mind, sensing the hobbit's flattery and half-truths, though he never quite binds him as Glaurung bound Turin. Still, for the world of men and dwarves that remains, Smaug is the top of the food chain. What does this mean when we set him against a Maiar like Sauron? If even Morgoth's greatest dragons, backed by a dark power in his full prime, could not overthrow the Valar, can a lone Third Age dragon truly unmake one of their lesser but still terrible servants? We uncover here the story behind the story. Smaug can burn fortresses, annihilate armies, and shatter kingdoms, but he cannot erase a being whose power is anchored in the very fabric of the world. So this comparison quietly reinforces our earlier verdict. On the mortal scale, Smaug is a catastrophe. On the cosmic scale, the one that shapes the fate of Middle-earth, his fire begins to look small, and yet how that fire might still wound Sauron, delay him, or even topple his works, that is where our deep dives into Middle-earth lore now lead us next. Appendix C. Dragons, Balrogs, and Maiar, a power ladder. So to make sense of that cosmic scale, we need a ladder. Not a neat, numbered chart, but a rough shape of the heights and depths above Smaug's fire. Because in Tolkien's world, power is not just claws and fangs, not just blades and towers, but the weight of the spirit, the clarity of the will, the brightness or corruption of the soul. At the very summit stand the Valar, the great powers who entered the world at its beginning. Not kings of a single realm, but shapers of seas and mountains, singers of the ancient music that still echoes through the ages. Below them are the Maiar, the lesser but still mighty spirits. Sauron, Gandalf, the Balrogs, the blue wizards vanishing into the hidden east. These are beings who existed before the sun rose, who remember roads that no longer appear on any map. All right, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's step together into this power ladder more carefully. Sauron is a Maya of high rank, once the servant of Auli, then the chief lieutenant of Morgoth. Not a mere warlord, not just a sorcerer in armor, but a strategic mind whose influence bends whole ages. By the late Third Age, he stands below the Vala in sheer being, yet above most of his fellow Maya in reach and design. Even the Balrogs, terrifying as they are, were captains under Morgoth. Sauron was the one who built systems, fortresses, and long plots that stretched over centuries. What then of those Balrogs? They are Maiar too, spirits wrapped in shadow and flame, scourges of the First Age. A single Balrog can break armies, cast down towers, and wrestle with elf lords on mountain peaks. Yet they are not invincible. Glorfindel throws down a Balrog at the cost of his own life. Gandalf the Grey meets Durin's Bane in the deeps of Moria, and after terrible wanderings and battle, destroys it. The story behind the story is that even divine spirits, once they bind themselves to the world, can be opposed by rare, exceptional souls. Dragons, by contrast, stand in another category. They are not, as far as Tolkien tells us, Maya in disguise, but creatures shaped and corrupted by Morgoth, infused with a dark spiritual potency. Their fire can melt stone, their wings command the sky, their voices pierce the minds of elves and men. Smaug is one of the last and greatest of these, near the peak of what we might call the creature tier of Middle-earth. But above Smaug still loom the true spirits, Balrogs, the Istari, and Sauron himself, especially when his being is anchored to the One Ring. Can a dragon's fire truly unmake a will that has survived the downfall of Númenor? Can cunning and terror match an immortal strategist whose shadow reaches from Dol Guldur to Mordor? As we journey into the next part of our deep dives into Middle-earth lore, we'll test Smaug against that higher tier and see where, on this ladder, his doom was always waiting. Appendix D. Psychological warfare, fear as a weapon. So now we leave raw power for a moment and step into something quieter, and in some ways, darker. Not claws, not fire, fear. Because if we journey into the minds of those who faced Smaug and Sauron, we uncover a different battlefield entirely, one where the first wound is struck long before any blade is drawn. Smaug rules his valley not only with flame, but with the promise of flame. His roar rolls out across the grey waters of Long Lake, and men freeze on the quays before they even see his shadow. His sudden descents from the ancient heights turn busy towns into empty streets in a heartbeat. And when he speaks, mocking Thorin and Bilbo in the dim halls of Erebor, every word is a weapon, stripping away courage, naming their greed, making them feel small and foolish beneath that jeweled gaze. For long years, the mere story of the dragon on the mountain is enough to keep dwarves from returning, to keep men farming further downriver, to hollow out an entire region by reputation alone. Sauron works in the same element, but on another scale. His fear is not a single roar in a valley, it is a language, a presence, a shadow on the age. The black speech, when Gandalf casts it into the council chamber, makes even wise hearts tremble, because it carries the taste of his will. The eye in Barad-dûr is never truly seen by most of the world, yet its imagined gaze weighs on captains in Gondor, on riders in Rohan, on a gardener in the Shire who has never heard the name Anatar. The Nazgul's cries over Osgiliath or on the Pelennor break lines before swords meet, and despair runs ahead of his armies like a dark herald. So we get this contrast. Smaug's terror is intense but local, bound to the circle of his wings and the echo of his voice. Sauron's is diffuse but far-reaching, seeping along forgotten roads as rumour, as old tales by the fire, as a sense that the world itself is running down into grey defeat. One empties a lake town. The other drains the hope of whole kingdoms across centuries. If these two currents of fear ever collided, what then? A dragon, bred in the furnaces of Morgoth's ancient malice, is not a trembling man of Lake Town. Smaug might shrug off the cries that send horses rearing and soldiers to their knees. Yet Sauron's spiritual pressure is patient, corrosive. Day after day, year after year, the eye probing, the will tightening, could even a great worm remain untouched by that weight? Or would suspicion, restlessness, and an unnameable dread begin to gnaw at him from within? And here we reach the heart of Tolkien's pattern. Fear is the primary weapon of evil, but it is also brittle. Bard's single arrow flies straighter than Smaug's roar. Frodo's small steps carry him further than Sauron's shadow. The story behind the story is that every great terror in this world is finally tested not by equal terror, but by quiet, stubborn courage. All right, dim the lights, get comfortable, because in the next part we'll follow that courage into a direct clash and ask what happens when Dragonfire actually meets the Dark Lord's design. Appendix E. Alternate matchups: Smaug versus Balrog, Witch King, and more. Because once you've imagined Dragonfire crashing against the will of the Dark Lord, it's hard not to let your mind wander further down those ancient roads. If Smaug could be weighed against Sauron, what about the other terrors that move through the grey shadow of the Third Age? What happens if we journey into those matchups the legend never quite shows us? Picture first, fire against fire. In the lightless deeps beneath the misty mountains, a Balrog of Morgoth rises, its form a living shadow wreathed in flame, whip cracking, sword blazing. Above, Smaug wheels through the dark, his belly a furnace, his wings beating hot winds through the ruined halls. Not a mere clash of big monsters, not simply a brawl of teeth and steel, but Morgoth's two most iconic corrupted creations facing one another, each bearing ancient terror in a different shape. Would Dragonfire sear Spirit Fire? Would the Balrog's whip drag Smaug from the air, or would the dragon's cunning keep him always just out of reach? The legend falls silent. The story behind the story remains hidden. Then shift the scene to a broken battlefield under a black, starless sky. Smaug coils on a mound of shattered mail and burned banners. Before him stands not a warrior, but a Wraith King robed in shadow, crown invisible yet terrible, the Witch King of Angmar. The Nazgul fear fire, we are told, yet they are also deathless, bound to Sauron's will, sheathed in sorcery and prophecy. Dragonfire roars, unseen spells coil in answer. Could Smaug's ancient pride resist that malice-laden voice pressing into his mind? Could the Witch King's doom, not by the hand of man, twist in some unexpected way when faced with a creature who is neither man nor elf, but an older, crueler power? We uncover only hints, never answers. Or lift your eyes higher still, into the cold airs above the world. Smaug climbs, vast and crimson, against the clouds. Out of the west there comes a beating of many wings, white and gold in the sun. The eagles, proud servants of Manwë, Maya touched and bound to a different authority than gold or fear. Aerial supremacy is no longer certain. Is dragonflight stronger than beings who have, in some dim sense, the wind and the will of the West at their backs? Could sheer fire and rage overcome creatures who have carried Gandalf himself, who move when the fate of Middle-earth hangs in the balance? Each of these imagined duels reveals a different facet of Tolkien's world. Raw physical might, straining against spiritual authority, ancient corruption testing itself against divine favor, personal pride running headlong into narrative purpose. Not every fight is meant to be fair. Some are meant to show what this age and these centuries are really about. All right, dim the lights. Get comfortable, because this is where you come in. Which road would you like us to follow in a future deep dive into Middle-earth lore? Smaug versus Balrog? Smaug versus Witch King? Or Smaug versus the Eagles in the High Airs of the North? Tell us in the comments, and we'll let your choices guide which hidden clash we step together into next. Final farewell, leaving the Age of Dragons behind. But for now, we've walked that road as far as it will go. Smaug has risen and fallen, Sauron has gathered and spent his strength, and we're left standing at the quiet edge of the Third Age, looking back at the fires that once lit the sky. It's a strange feeling, isn't it, to realize that by the time the ring is cast into the cracks of doom, both the last great dragon and the Dark Lord himself are gone, leaving a world handed over to men. The age that follows is less blazing, less obviously heroic. No dragonfire pouring down from the lonely mountain. No great eye wreathed in shadow over Mordor. Instead, there are grey cities, rebuilding, kings who must rule without wizards at their side, farmers who till lands once trampled by orc hosts. Quieter, yes, but more fragile too, because there is no ancient guardian, no terrible enemy to focus every heart. Just the long, uncertain work of peace. And that perhaps is where the power of Tolkien really settles in. We came here asking who would win in a fight, who would bend or break in the clash between Smaug and Sauron. But as we journey into these hidden centuries, we uncover something else. The story behind the story is not simply about victory, but about the world that survives the victories. What good is it to burn the necromancer out of Dol Guldur if the Shire is lost in the process? What is the fate of Middle-earth if the dragons triumph, but there are no hobbits left to laugh under the party tree? Through all our wanderings in this video, the speculative duels, the ancient lineages, the long roads from Angban's first fire drakes to the last shadow over Erebor, you stayed. So thank you truly for walking that long, winding path of lore and what-if with us. It's your love of this world, your willingness to dim the lights, get comfortable, and listen to tales of grey wizards and golden hordes that makes deep dives into Middle-earth lore worth creating. When you close this tab and step back into your own age, try carrying a small fragment of that world with you. Maybe it's Smaug's terrible confidence tempered into courage when you face your own quieter dragons, a hard conversation, a lonely day, a hidden fear that no one else can quite see. Maybe it's Sauron's downfall, reminding you that even the most towering systems of cruelty can be unmade by small, unlooked-for acts of heroism. A kindness no one will record. A mercy no one demanded. In the end, picture this with us. The lonely mountain, dark and silent, its gates cold where once molten gold ran like rivers. Barad-dûr toppled, its black crown broken, its seeing stone dim. Above them both, the sky is at last clear. No dragonfire, no eye, only stars. bright and distant, shining down on a world that has, for now, survived. Until the next road calls, and we step together into another story.